Chapter 90, Pu Yao's counterattack from any angle. Zuemo wasn't a slow person. Of course, Pu Yao might have his own opinions about this point. The changes in the sect allowed Zuemo to smell a strange flavor. Master had sternly told him to work hard and not slack off. She also said the jade scrolls in the sect, including all the scrolls in Fragrant Ginger Yard, were all open to him and he did not need to spend a single contribution point. A benefit that Zuemo could have only dreamed about in the past was placed in front of him, but he wasn't happy at all. The sect leader and the other Shirbua had announced these measures immediately after coming back. This meant that something had definitely happened or was going to happen. After the experiences of these 2 years, he knew this very well. Spells were Jingshi. No matter which sect or organization, they wouldn't freely pass spells to people. In the past, it was normal that the sect required contribution points for spells. Contribution points were effectively Jingshi. But the sect leader suddenly said that spells didn't need contribution points anymore. This clearly meant there was a problem. Something was going to happen. Zuemo felt out the situation by asking if he needed to go train his body under Xin Yen Shirbua. Master's answer once again proved his guess. He didn't need to go. Xin Yen Shirbua was going into seclusion to forge. After that, Master told him that she was going into seclusion to make Dan and didn't have time to teach him, so he needed to study hard on his own. The conversation between him and Master lasted for a whole 4 hours. How to study and everything else, as though she needed to make everything clear. The bad feelings Zuemo felt became even heavier. In the end, Master had hesitated and urged him to spend more time practicing the sword. It was fine if he was slowing in Dan making. If, at this time, Zuemo still didn't know that there was a problem, then he was truly an idiot. Master waved her hand to send him away. When he had stepped outside the door to the Dan room, the weak sigh that Master had given, Zuemo had heard it extremely clearly. Returning to the West Wind Yard, Zuemo's mood wasn't good, as though he was suffocating. This day, he didn't cultivate. At night, lying on the roof, his head pillowed on his arms, he looked at the stars in the sky in a daze. The sound tablet by his side quietly broadcasted all kinds of news. "What are you worried about?" Pu Yao had come out at some unknown time. "I feel that something is going to happen," Zuemo said as he looked at the stars. "Something is going to happen. 2 years ago when I opened my eyes, all I thought of was surviving in the sect. At that time, I didn't have any ideas and never thought about the future. I got used to staying here, used to this mountain. After, Master was very good to me, even though her temper might not be good. And Wei Xing Xixiang, Old Black, Liang Feng Shiji, Xiao Guo, even if something is going to happen, you can't do anything about it," Pu Yao said unconcernedly. "I know." Zuemo's eyes were slightly dark. "My power is so weak. If something was really going to happen, I can't help." "Then isn't that all?" Pu Yao asked strangely. "But I don't want," gazing at the faraway stars, Zuemo lightly muttered. Pu Yao became silent. He seemed to have remembered something. The second day, early in the morning, Zuemo ran to the rented Ling garden and did a round of maintenance. He was just preparing to leave when someone came searching for him. "Could you be Mr. Zua, Ling plant farmer Zuemo?" The person asked politely, his face intelligent. Zuemo was slightly surprised. "That's me. This one has long heard of your name." A hint of joy came across the person's face, but he still showed extreme control. "This one is Hirong and has a little shop. I heard that Mr. Zuemo has planted a lot of fiery red flower. This one came to ask if Mr. Zuemo is willing to sell." Zuemo nodded. "I did plant a lot of fiery red flower. However, there's still some time until they mature." Hirong smiled and said, "This one wants to reserve it first." "Oh. What kind of reserve?" Zuemo hadn't thought that the market had such high demand. His fiery red flowers hadn't matured and there were actually people that were coming up to reserve them. Since he had planted this batch of fiery red flowers to sell, it was naturally better that people were finding him. How much has Mr. Zuemo planted? He Rong asked. 80 mu. He Rong mused for a beat and then said, right now, the market price of fiery red flower is about 2 pieces of third-grade jingsha per tael. How much does Mr. Zuemo think the harvest will be? About 20 caddies. Zuemo gave a conservative number. As expected of a ling plant farmer, the yield is astonishing. He Rong praised. He then followed up, I'm willing to first give 60 pieces of third-grade jingsha as a down payment. If the market price in the future is lower than 2 pieces of third-grade jingsha per tael, I will buy at this price and add the remainder. If it is higher than this price, then I will pay according to the market price. What does Mr. Zhu think? This price was already very good. Zuemo thought for a second before nodding, good. He suddenly asked, what's the price of second-grade fiery red flower? His ling fields would produce some second-grade fiery red flower, but there wouldn't be too much. 50 pieces of third-grade jingsha per tael. He Rong was slightly shocked. When he thought about the fact the other was a ling plant farmer, he then added, if there is second-grade fiery red flower, this one is willing to take as much as there is. N. Zuemo then asked about the market for all kinds of herbs and medicines. He Rong was clearly experienced. He could almost unhesitatingly report the prices of all herbs. After that, the two created an agreement and exchanged imprints. The imprints, it was to leave behind one's spiritual imprint on a blank jade scroll. This way, it was easier for the two to communicate. With imprints, the paper cranes could easily find the other for convenient communication. Zuemo could not do flying sword messages. He could only use paper cranes. Previously, other than the pink paper crane woman, Zuemo basically never used paper cranes. Paper cranes cost money. In the past, with his situation, he wouldn't bear it. 60 pieces of third-grade jingsha, for Zuemo, it was a gigantic sum of money. Maybe he should buy a suit of ling armor. The ling armor he was wearing now was the second-grade ling armor that Yen Lusherbua had given him. It really didn't match with the fine third-grade talismans such as Water Drop Sword. However, he only thought about it. It was naturally possible to buy a third-grade ling armor with 60 pieces of third-grade jingsha, but what that amount could buy was normal third-grade ling armor. It wasn't enough for the finest armors. After thinking, he decided to temporarily not spend the jingsha. He remembered his body still contained the great consumer of jingsha, Pu Yao. As expected, when he returned to Little West Wind Yard, Pu Yao came out. I want the jingsha, say, what do you want to exchange it for? Pu Yao's words were very proud, but he then reminded Zuemo, however, this little bit of jingsha, you won't get much of a good thing in return. What can I exchange it for? Zuemo wasn't dumb and tested the waters. Even though Pu Yao's intelligence was a bit low right now, but this person's history was marked. He had forced through a lot of transactions. I hadn't thought that you would have learnt. Pu Yen scanned Zuemo a few times and then smiled cunningly, but this is better, a fair business transaction. Just 60 pieces of third-grade jingsha, what you can exchange for is a little trick using the consciousness. How about it? Or you can first make a payment, learn a section, then pay to learn another section. It's better to pay all at the same time. Zuemo understood Pu Yao's character very well. If it was making regular payments, this guy would raise the price sky high. If he was stuck in the middle, he would definitely be in trouble. He. Up to you. How about it? Do you want to learn this little trick? Pu Yao smiled darkly, the blood eye was like it was looking at prey. Zuemo felt his hairs stand up. Zuemo gritted his teeth, learn. He had kept on practicing embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, and his consciousness far surpassed the average person. However, he didn't know how to use it. His only use of his consciousness was when he was monitoring the Ling Dan during Dan making. Ha ha. Pu Yao smiled, satisfied. Ding ding dong dong. A stream of sounds from Jingshi hitting each other, and made Suomo's heart ache. 60 pieces of third-grade Jingshi. Here. Pu Yao threw a ball of light at Suomo, throwing down we're clear. Before disappearing. Having had a previous experience, Suomo took the ball of light. The moment the light ball touched his hand, it turned to countless characters that floated in his mind. Fragrance knowledge. Using the consciousness, able to remember the attributes of any female and never forget. Also, as long as the other was in a radius of 500 li from the user could detect the other's position and find them. When the user was skilled, if they used this scripture, even if the other was thousands of miles away, the user could easily find them. Also, this scripture could detect the quality of the ling potential females had. At the very end, Suomo saw a final sentence in conclusion: this scripture is the essential scripture for every pervert who wants to do paired cultivation. Suomo wanted to spit up blood. Pu Yao. Yi will kill you. Return Ye's Jingshi. In the little west wing yard, a heart-wrenching howl echoed. In the sea of consciousness, Pu Yao sat on the gravestone, extremely smug and cunning, saying, ha 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 ha, maze formation, humph humph, in the future, if anyone discuss formations with me, I'll discuss women with them. Ahaha, Pu Yao still held a grudge against Suomo's answer from last time. He was extremely exhilarated about this counterattack. The next few days, Suomo didn't not recover from this painful blow. 60 pieces of third-grade Jingshi exchanged for such an useless scripture, Suomo wanted to tear Pu Yao to pieces and feed him to the dogs. Deeply impacted, Suomo decided to make golden crow pills to recover his losses. 60 pieces of third-grade Jingshi. That was 300 golden crow pills. Last time, he had made a few hundred golden crow pills and it almost killed him. Carrying grief and motivation, Suomo raced for fragrant ginger yard, aspiring to furiously make golden crow pills. But quickly, he heard an unlucky news. Su Qing told him that the ingredients in the sect for the fasting pill had been used up. He hurried to ask Liang Feng Shiji, and the news he received was like lightning on a clear day. A certain ingredient was not being supplied anymore on the market. According to Shiji's speculations, there was someone maliciously hoarding the ingredients. The use of this ingredient was extremely widespread. Many Lingdan required it. One of his avenues of wealth now cut off, it was like a stick to Suomo's head. Accordingly, his hatred of Pu Yao quickly rose. 60 pieces of third-grade Jingshi, it only bought a scripture that didn't have any use, especially when he didn't have much money in the first place. He could not bear it. Suomo murderously went to find Pu Yao. Chapter 91, Merging Sword Essences. When Pu Yao saw Suomo, he smiled. Pu Yao, I don't want this garbage scripture. Either you return the Jingshi, or exchange it for another scripture. Suomo's eyes were red, like a furious thin zombie, hatefully staring at Pu Yao. Pu Yao's light laugh was like the hiss of a snake. He slowly drawled, there's no such thing as refunds and exchanges here. In the future, don't think about getting Jingshi. Suomo hatefully said. Pu Yao wasn't affected. He propped up his chin, his peerlessly beautiful face full of mockery, relaxed and carefree. I don't need your permission anyway. Hearing this, Suomo stopped breathing. Finally, he remembered that he didn't seem to have any ways of stopping this guy. He wasn't satisfied. Suomo hated so much that his teeth ached but didn't know what to do. Being shut down by Pu Yao wasn't a surprise. If he could have gotten something off Pu Yao, then it would be an amazing matter. The making of golden crow pills was stuck, the fiery red flowers in the Ling gardens hadn't matured, Suomo instantly lost all avenues of income. Especially right now when he was penniless. Without Jingshi, he couldn't do anything. Suomo could only stay in the little yard and cultivate, go to the Ling garden. Any other times, he would go to fragrant ginger yard to practice dan making. He couldn't make Golden Crow pills, but the other Dan medicines were not affected. It was lucky that his reputation was now great, and since Master was in seclusion to make Dan, his tab with Su Qing could be greater. It was a pity that he couldn't find a Dan that was as easy to sell and as profitable as Golden Crow pill. From the accounts, he was more in debt. Su Qing wasn't concerned. This was normal. If people would earn Jingshi from the moment they started learning Dan making, then everyone would be learning Dan making. Zuomo remembered what Master had said to him, spend more time practicing the sword. This sentence, he remembered it very clearly. The meaning behind these words didn't need to be said. Okay, since he couldn't make Jingshi, then he will practice the sword. He had already reached a pretty good level with Li Water Sword Scripture, but he had reached a barrier. He didn't have any idea of how to develop it further. What he could think about now was to see if he could merge Xi and Yen Shirbua's Tidal Sword Essence and Li Water Sword Essence together. This idea had sprouted when he had seen the sword river in his consciousness that was divided in two. However, merging two different sword essences was an extremely difficult matter. Luckily, almost all the jade scrolls in the sect were open, including Xi and Yen Shirbua's Ice Dragon Sword Scripture. This time, the effect of opening the jade scrolls to the disciples wasn't large. Wei Xing Shixiang was in the sword cave, Su Yi Shixiang was obsessed with forging, Gong Sun Qing Shiji was packing up to travel to her betrothed, Luo Li Shixiang was still in seclusion, Su Yi Xia and Hao Min didn't have much interest in the sword. Eldest Shixiang Qin Cheng was on a trip to manage affairs. Overall, the person most interested in these sword scripture scrolls was Zuomo. What Zuomo was most interested in was Ice Dragon Sword Scripture. In reality, this was the jade scroll he was most surprised about when the scrolls had been released this time. They even let this one out. The sect's strongest was Void Sword Scripture, but in Zuomo's heart, Ice Dragon Scripture was the strongest sword scripture. He had never seen how powerful Void Sword Scripture was, but he had personally experienced Xi and Yen Shirbua's terrifying sword essence many times and it had left a deep impression on him. To be able to see the entirety of Ice Dragon Sword Scripture, it was a matter that Zuomo was overjoyed about. However, he quickly found that Ice Dragon Sword Scripture was like some of the jade scrolls in Fragrant Ginger Yard. The contents you were able to see were appropriate for the cultivation you had. If the cultivation wasn't high enough, you couldn't see the contents. This was to stop people who didn't have the cultivation but forced themselves to practice from damaging themselves. Zuomo couldn't see much of the contents, just the impression method of the flying sword and some of the shallower contents. Seeing this, he couldn't help but sigh. Water Drop Sword might be much higher in grade than Ice Crystal Sword, but it wasn't as suited as Ice Crystal Sword for practicing Ice Dragon Sword Scripture. This firms Zuomo's determination to merge the two sword essence. If for nothing else, it was worth it just for the Water Drop Sword. The language of Ice Dragon Sword was extremely profound and cryptic. But since Zuomo had a rough understanding of Ice Dragon Sword Essence, using it as a reference, he was actually able to understand the majority of the contents. After reading what was available to him, Zuomo put down the scroll and fell into contemplation. This deep contemplation of his was 10 days long. He did not eat, drink, nor sleep, and did not rest for 10 days. On the 10th day, Zuomo suddenly opened his eyes and raised his hand to form a sword energy. Poof! A streak of cool yet fiery light, containing the sharpness of a sword, hit the ground. It left behind a deep hole. On the edges of the hole, there were many traces of ice. It was a pity he could only force the two together like this. There were still many places in the new sword essence that Zuomo felt were very vague. It could only wait until Zuomo had a deeper understanding of Ice Dragon Sword Scripture and continuous battle for comprehension before he would become familiar. The new sword essence was with the Li Water Sword Essence as the primary and the Ice Dragon Sword Essence as the auxiliary. Originally, Ice Dragon Sword Essence was of higher grade than Li Water Sword Essence and it should have been Ice Dragon Sword Essence as primary and Li Water Sword Essence as auxiliary. But Zhuo Mo's understanding of Li Water sword essences was far deeper than his understanding of Ice Dragon sword essence. After the two were merged, the power of the sword energy increased dramatically. In comparison, the merging of sword moves was much easier than merging sword essences. No matter if it was Ice Dragon sword scripture or Li Water sword scripture, they didn't have complex or long moves. It was a pity no one came for him to test his sword with. Zhuo suddenly started to miss those people from Lingying sect. If, once in a while, someone came for him to test his sword with, and also came with a fine talisman, how great would that be? When Zhuo found out that his thinking had took 10 days, he instantly jumped. Uncaring of anything else, he rode the gray-beaked goose towards the Ling garden. What he could celebrate was that the state of the fiery red flower and the other herbs in the Ling garden were very good and there wasn't much change. He could finally release a breath. Extremely tired, he simply laid down on the grass in the Ling garden and fell asleep. Dong Fu had recovered from the previous chaotic situation. This place had once again become a gathering ground for low-level shouja. Without those high-level shouja, the pressure that had been in the hearts of the low-level shouja instantly was swept away. The city became lively once again. Did you hear? The Dong Fu Sword Test Conference is going to begin. I heard. You can go as long as you are Zhuji. The qualification is really low this time. Dong Fu Hall has really put in a lot of resources this time. So many prizes, they are really generous. Che, so what? In the end, it would be you Bai who gets it. Just moving from the left pocket to the right. That's not so certain. Didn't Wukong Sword Sect have a genius called Wei Sheng? I feel he could be a dark horse. Wei Sheng. I also heard about him. Supposedly, Wukong Sword Sect also has a guy called the Scalping Zombie, extremely vicious. Who isn't vicious? It's only us that aren't vicious. Yu Bai, Zhong Ming Yan, they are all vicious. That's so true. The news that the time for the Dong Fu Sword Test Conference was quickly approaching became the hottest topic in Dong Fu. The number and quality of prizes offered this time was enough to make everyone gape. No one understood what was going on in Tian Song Zi's head that he would pay such a great price to hold a sword test conference. 4th grade Green Pine Sword, 4th grade 100 Desolation Lucky Beast Belt, 4th grade Fragmented Gold Coronet, 3rd grade Rowan Sleeve, 3rd grade Sky Shirt, 3rd grade Icy Cobra Ling Armor. It had to be said that this move was extremely effective. The generous prizes greatly stirred the excitement of young shouja, especially the poor disciples of those small sections. Where would they have the jingshi to buy talismans? They all drooled as they looked at the prizes. Once the news was announced, the people who registered were numerous. Since it didn't cost anything to register, it would be stupid not to. If they were lucky, they might be able to scoop up a talisman. They wouldn't lose anything if they lost. However, they had to start from the preliminary sword test conference and go through several rounds before entering the sword test conference. The more significant sects in Dong Fu had an allotment of slots. They could directly attend the sword test conference without first going through the preliminary sword test conference. Even though the treatment was different, the attendees didn't have many angry words. The lower the level of the shouja, the more they understood the realities of the world. If the world was like this, what could they be angry about? Other than the shouja in Dong Fu's surroundings, the sword test conference this time had attracted large numbers of skilled people from the other 12 primary towns. Under the lure of a heavy reward, there would be courageous people. Due to holding a sword test conference, Dong Fu became abnormally busy. It was the second day when Zhuo woke up. The blinding sunlight woke him from a deep sleep. With his body fully rested, he became as vigorous and energetic as usual. When he returned to the little west wind yard, he went to clean out the ling fields, sorting out the ling grasses which had matured. He was planning on going to Dong Fu at some time. These ling grasses could be exchanged for some jingshi. Just like normal, he burrowed into the stone room and started to practice embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation and Vajra Profound Sutra. 4 hours later, he opened his eyes, revealing joy. Just now, his cultivation had broken through to the 4th level of Zhuji. Different from his consciousness which had kept on stopping before reaching 3rd breath, the increase in his Ling power was very quick. In a very short amount of time, he had broken through to Zhuji 4th level. This speed could be called terrifying. Of course, the Ling vein had played a crucial role. If it wasn't for this Ling vein, he would probably still be at the 2nd level. Based on this speed, he would quickly break through to Ningmai. By that time, he would finally have some measure of self-protection. In Sky Moon Jia, Jindan was undoubtedly the highest level of existence. The next level down was Ningmai. However, the difference in power between different Ningmai Xiuzha was very big, but no matter what, if he reached Ningmai, he would finally leave behind the ranks of low-level Xiuzha. If one didn't have much ambition, Ningmai Xiuzha could live a pretty good life in Sky Moon Jie. The benefits and tribute a Ningmai Xiuzha received wasn't on the same level as a Zhuji Xiuzha. After practicing embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, Zhuemo started Vajra Profound Sutra. As to fragrance knowledge, he threw the scripture to one side. Studying women, it was better to study maize formations. The version of Vajra Profound Sutra Zhuemo practiced was the gravestone version. After practicing it for a length of time, he discovered the difference between the two versions was increasingly greater. In meditation, Zhuemo sat upright, his entire body was like a statue forged from dark gold. Suddenly, his entire body started to tremble furiously. Chapter 92, Yin Fire Bead Chapter Zhuemo's body shook like dice. The tendons in his forehead and shoulders were thick like earthworms, they were extremely horrifying. Pu Yao had come out at some time. Seeing Zhuemo's state, he seemed slightly startled. Zhuemo's body continued to tremble for almost an hour before ceasing. Zhuemo opened his eyes and heavily exhaled. His eyes looked slightly uncertain. Just now, he felt that his body seemed to have changed slightly, but as to what had changed, he didn't know. He lowered his head to inspect himself and didn't make any discoveries. There wasn't any problems with the gravestone version of Vajra Profound Sutra, right? His heart jumped. Who taught you this? Pu Yao's voice suddenly came from behind him. Zhuemo jumped in fright. Turning, he released a breath upon seeing it was Pu Yao. When you were wounded, it was written on the gravestone. Pu Yao didn't seem surprised. He only nodded his head, keep practicing. Zhuemo's heart finally settled. Since Pu Yao said for him to keep practicing, then there shouldn't be a problem. Even though he had encountered great pain when breaking through one breath with embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, but he had to admit that embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation was a good thing. Up until now, Zhuemo hadn't found a scripture higher in level than embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Fragrance knowledge truly isn't suited for you. Pu Yao said something that surprised Zhuemo enormously. He followed up, I'll teach you another way to use your consciousness. Zhuemo stared at Pu Yao for a long beat. In the end, he couldn't resist asking, Pu Yao, are you okay? Pu Yao didn't pay attention to him, stating, you still have a dozen or so of yin beads. Your control of fire isn't bad. I'll teach you how to make yin fire beads. Pu Yao really had been wounded in the head this time. The previous Pu Yao definitely wouldn't do something like this. Zhuemo looked sympathetically at Pu Yao. Of course, he didn't say anything. If there was something to be gained freely and he didn't take it, then he would be stupid. Pu Yao was now acting stupid, but did he have to follow in stupidity? He listened extremely carefully, afraid of missing a word. Last time, yin beads had caused a great disaster in Dongfu. However, that had also informed Zhuemo of just how valuable yin beads were. Without a doubt, yin beads were good things. Valuable things. Something that even those Jindan experts were fighting over, how could it not be a good thing? The method of making yin fire beads wasn't complicated, but the contents were extremely lengthy. After a while, Pu Yao was impatient and threw a ball of light at Sui Mo, letting him read the entire yin fire bead chapter by himself. To make yin fire beads, there were 3 requirements. The first was yin beads, the second was fire, and the third was spiritual power. The more pure and dense the yin bead was, the higher grade the fire was, the stronger the consciousness was, the greater the power of the yin fire bead produced. The entire chapter was completely about these 3 points. The density and formation of yin beads were related to the level of cultivation. The manipulation of spiritual power had a crucial effect during the creation of the yin-fired bead. But in the entire chapter, most of the contents were descriptions of all kinds of fire seeds and flames. In this chapter, the descriptions of fire seeds and flames were extremely detailed. It seemed to have ranked all of the fire seeds and flames that could be used to make yin fire beads. One of them was the fire that Sui Mo dreamed of, Golden Crow Fire. Due to the differences in fires, the effects of the yin fire beads made were different. All kinds of rare and strange flames broadened Sui Mo's knowledge and amazed him. Until he finished, he was still hungry for more. He had never thought that there would be so many kinds of flame in the world. There were even many strange and relatively unknown flames in low-grade flames. This was also the most detailed and complete scripture that he had encountered up until now. He didn't know which sect the scripture came from. To be able to study fire to this depth, they were really skilled. As he thought, his heart started to itch and he now wanted to make a few yin fire beads. According to the records in the scripture, as long as he could find a suitable fire, the yin fire beads that he could make would be something that even Ningmai wouldn't easily meet head-on. Yin beads, this thing was really too sensitive. Even if he did make yin fire beads, Sui Mo wouldn't easily use them. However, if he had this as one of his hidden cards, if it was a matter of life or death, it maybe could save him. Thinking about it, Sui Mo was even more tempted. In the sea of consciousness, Pu Yao stood in front of the gravestone, smirking. You finally couldn't bear it anymore. 3,000 years, your patience finally reached its limits. A guy who isn't willing to abide by your rules, even as old-fashioned as you actually compromised. The gravestone was silent. Pu Yao suddenly became excited, sharpness in his blood eye, shouting, then why weren't you willing to compromise before? The gravestone was still silent. Pu Yao closed his eyes. When he opened them, he was so calm that he seemed like another person. His alluring and handsome face had faint disdain. You're dead yet you still want to leave behind your will. When did you become this stupid? He raised his chin, coldly gazing at the gravestone. Also, how can I let you do as you please? Dead, then you shouldn't leave anything behind. Such an interesting game. The gravestone was silent as usual. Sui Mo wiped the sweat off his face. He cut a sorry figure, his body covered in dirt and dry leaves. Wukong Mountain was situated among a vast stretch of mountains. The places that had some density of Ling energy naturally were already occupied. What was abundant was a desolate landscape. Xiuzhou weren't interested in lands that had no Ling energy. They also didn't have any use for normal lumber. Other than Yao beasts, normal wild beasts were just a lump of meat in the eyes of Xiuzhou. Now that every sect raised their own Ling beasts, there naturally wasn't anyone who hunted these animals. The woods that were lacking in Ling energy, no one usually cared for them. Sui Mo was in a poor backwater location now. It was a mountain valley, trees were growing in every direction, most of them were covered in ivy. The high mountain peak blocked the sunlight. This place never saw the sun. The air was filled with a rotting stench. It had been many years since someone had came to this mountain valley. The leaves covering the ground were extremely thick. This kind of place was a breeding ground for miasma, but Sui Mo had prepared and made some first-grade detoxification dan. Over the last few days, he had been making his way through this vast forest. Right now, the elders of the sect were either out on errands or in seclusion. No one was looking over him. He was free and unrestrained. After he had seen the complete method to making fire beads, he had the idea of searching for a fire seed. What he wanted the most was golden crow fire. Een Fire Bead Chapter had a high opinion of golden crow fire. The Een fire bead that was created with golden crow fire would be extremely young and extremely masculine, astoundingly powerful. But in the short term, he could only think about golden crow fire. Before he could find a substitute herb, he couldn't do anything. Even if he found an herb that could work as a substitute, he wasn't very confident that it was possible. It was better that he would first find a low-grade fire seed. Anything would be better than the streaming fire seal formation in the Dan cauldron. If he had a fire seed, he could naturally form flames and create some Een fire beads. There were many low-grade fire seeds that were introduced in the Een Fire Bead chapter. Mo was extremely motivated. However, any place that could form fire seeds, it must be a place with plentiful Ling energy. If this was in the past, he definitely wouldn't have any way. But now, he had a 4th-grade black gold worm. Even though this method seemed stupid, but Mo felt it was very plausible. He was full of confidence in this black gold worm. It could even find a place as hidden as the rock room. If there really was a Ling vein, it definitely could find it. But his luck wasn't that good. He specially picked backwater places. After searching in the mountains for a week, he still hadn't discovered anything. Each day, he would start as soon as the sun rose. Occasionally, he would be harassed by animals, yet his hands were empty. It would be a lie to say he wasn't demotivated. But when he thought of Wei Xing Shixiang, Mo felt that this little bit of trouble really wasn't anything. He relaxed even more when he thought about it. If it could be easily felt, then he wouldn't have a chance at it. Looking at the surrounding geography, he decided to try. Taking down a bamboo cylinder slightly thicker than a thumb from his waist, he uncorked it and cast a spell. The black gold worm climbed out of the cylinder, its antenna nimbly moving, and then started crawling deeper into a mountain valley. Mo's mind became alert. There was something. This was the first time the black gold worm had reacted like this. He had already become suspicious that this gold-black worm had degenerated. He hurried behind the black gold worm, limping as he sprinted. The water drop sword quickly chopped in the front. Anywhere it passed, all the branches and ivy turned to pieces and cleared out a road. Sprinting until he reached the bottom of a cliff, Mo saw a cave about half a person high. Weeds were growing over the opening. If he didn't look closely, it would be hard to find. Mo only hesitated a while before bending down and pushing in. The inside of the cave was actually large and vast. The cold wind blew Mo's hairs on end. He scanned the surroundings. Entering his eyes was stalactites and stalagmites that had formed over thousands of years. The drip-drop of water was abnormally clear in the quiet cave. Mo quickly found the black gold worm. It had stopped over a nondescript stalagmite. Compared to those wondrously shaped stalagmites, this stalagmite was only half a person tall, and didn't have anything that could attract a person's eye. Mo suddenly remembered a part of the Een Fire Bead chapter, and instantly became excited. He slowly inhaled, calming down his excitement before walking towards the stalagmite. Under his control, the black gold worm reluctantly climbed down the stalagmite and moved to the side. Mo raised the water drop sword, and following the top of the stalagmite, gently stabbed in. The water drop sword easily entered. Mo suddenly had a joyous expression. Raising the water drop sword, a milky white flame suddenly shot out of the cut. 2nd grade rare fire seed, stalagmite fire. Greedily looking at this quietly burning milky white flame, Mo restrained the excitement and joy inside. Gathering Ling power on his hands, he reached towards the stalagmite fire. The spells to gather fire seeds were detailed in Een Fire Bead chapter, even better than the spells Mo saw in Master's Records room. Silently channeling Ling power, his hands suddenly became attractive and with a hiss, this stalagmite fire entered his body. His expression suddenly became even more serious. Sucking the fire seed into his body didn't mean that he could celebrate. The next step was the truly important one. Only by taming the fire seed could the fire seed be used. But even though this stalagmite fire was just second grade, but it had passed through countless months, absorbed countless amounts of Ling energy, in order to form and grow to this large. How could it easily surrender? Chapter 93 Stalagmite Fire. The milky white stalagmite fire was born in the stalagmites of Yin caves, and was a kind of cold fire. Sucking it into his body, Zhuemo felt a cold energy quickly spread through the channels in his body. Even though he had prepared before, his body couldn't help but shake, the Ling power almost slipping out of control. Pushing aside his surprise, he tried to control the movement of Ling power to surround this stalagmite fire. This ball of stalagmite fire was provoked, the cold energy increasing. The milky white flame gave off a strong coldness. The coldness was also extremely humid. What was even more shocking was that, in such a freezing energy, the moisture hadn't been frozen into ice, but still existed as vapor. Quickly, Zhuemo felt the effect of the icy moisture. The unparalleled icy moisture, following the spitting of the flame, spread out in waves. The cold energy they contained was even more dense. Wherever they touched the channels would be damaged. They were like an extremely corrosive mist, leaving behind patches of frozen white wherever it passed. The numbness of the channels was extremely uncomfortable. Zhuemo gritted his teeth, continuing to control his Ling power to suppress this stalagmite fire. The stalagmite fire was like a trapped beast, furiously fighting, the flame spitting. The freezing moisture was like the deadly energy that this white beast spat out, trying its best to damage Zhuemo's channels. Zhuemo felt pain inside. He could only follow the method of taming fire seeds from the Yin Fire Bead chapter, furiously channeling Ling power. The Ling power in his body suddenly changed, quickly enveloping the stalagmite fire tightly. The stalagmite fire seemed to have detected the change as it was covered by Ling power, becoming more agitated than ever, furiously fighting. Zhuemo's Ling power flowed away quickly. The stronger the struggles of the stalagmite fire became, the faster the Ling power in his body would be used up. Zhuemo became slightly panicked. If this speed continued, his Ling power would quickly reach the bottom. Damn it! By now, this wasn't a question of whether or not he could tame this fire, but whether or not he could keep his life. If the stalagmite fire lost the suppression from Ling power, it would start burning from inside his body until he was burnt into a pile of ice. Who would have thought assimilating a second-grade fire seed would be so difficult? This wasn't going to work. At this time, Zhuemo couldn't attend to anything else. He was like a gambler that was on the precipice of death, eyes red from losing. The step behind them was the fall off a 1,000-foot-high cliff. There was no place to retreat. Since he could not retreat, then he would bet everything he had. You're just a second-grade stalagmite fire, you dare to fight with GE. You don't know what you've done. Strangely, the anger inside Zhuemo suddenly erupted after he was pushed to death's door. At this time, he didn't use Yin Fire Bead chapter. In his eyes, this stalagmite fire was just a large pest that had burrowed into his body. All of his spiritual power were gathered, and he unhesitatingly cast Art of Aged Gold. Zhuemo didn't have any remaining thought of taming it. He only had one thought. Kill it. A handful of golden mist transformed into a little gold sword. It was instinct after practicing the sword for so long. Without any need to think, the sword essence erupted. The robust sword essence released itself through the little sword. A golden light flashed on the little sword and it quickly melted, the golden liquid flowing and twisting. In the flick of a finger, a miniature golden water drop sword appeared inside Zhuemo's body. As the golden sword took shape, the robust sword essence quickly became murderous and cold. The coldness of the stalagmite fire was like the heart-piercing cold in the deep of the cold spring, and the icy sword essence exuded by the little water drop sword was like the endless cold wind of the tundra, carrying ice, sharp as a knife. Zhuemo hadn't thought that, just at this time, Art of Aged Gold suddenly broke through to the 4th level. Surrounded by Ling power, the struggling stalagmite fire suddenly stopped, motionless. Zhuemo's murderous intent, carried by the sword essence, was passed onto the stalagmite fire without any hindrance. If you keep moving, I'll kill you. If this stalagmite fire still didn't listen, then the water drop sword would cut it into pieces. He was prepared to give up this stalagmite fire. For a 2nd-grade stalagmite fire, to pay with his life, it wasn't profitable. But the next scene struck Zhuemo dumb. The milky white stalagmite fire shrunk into a small ball, like a little kid holding his legs in a ball, shaking. This action was so like what a person could do that Zhuemo's rage decreased slightly. So weird, these days, even fire seeds bullied the weak and were afraid of the strong. Muttering in his heart, he didn't dare let down his guard. This time, the stalagmite fire didn't stop Zhuemo's consciousness from seeping in. What Zhuemo didn't know was that this stalagmite fire, formed after countless years, had a basic intelligence. 2 hours later, Zhuemo opened his eyes, giving a long exhale. He pointed out his index finger and a milky white flame suddenly rose from his finger, silently burning. Thinking about the danger that had just passed, Zhuemo still had lingering fears. He had been yearning for a flame for a long time, but he was entirely ignorant about the process of assimilating a flame. Based on his cultivation, he would have had a difficult time taming this stalagmite fire. If he just barely tamed it, he would only end up burning himself to death. Thankfully, he had been inspired to use Art of Aged Gold and sword essence together to brutally suppress the stalagmite fire. However, Zhuemo was completely ignorant of the fact that taming a fire seed was related to cultivation. It was really dangerous. Having made a trip to death's doors and come back, Zhuemo wiped the sweat off his forehead. Thinking about the simple description on Yin Fire Bead chapter, and his own dangerous encounter, he muttered, it seemed like he couldn't completely believe Yin Fire Bead chapter. If he just followed the instructions, his little life would be gone. In the end, it was still that the things that Pu Yao gave weren't reliable. But upon further thought, he understood. Pu was a 3,000-year-old antique. The stuff he had naturally was the old things from 3,000 years ago. Those things were so old their teeth would be falling out. How could there not be a problem? Would antiques understand going with the times? Zhuemo continued to rant, swearing at Pu Yao as though this was what he needed to comfort his wounded soul. Of course, he could only rant. He was still afraid. It was very lucky that he hadn't made Golden Crow fire before. The 2nd-grade stalagmite fire almost took his little life. The 4th-grade Golden Crow fire, he wouldn't even be able to stop it and would just burn to ash. However, in all, Zhuemo was still very satisfied. This stalagmite fire was a 2nd-grade rare fire seed as ranked in Yin Fire Bead chapter, extremely uncommon. Zhuemo's mind suddenly shifted. Holding the water drop sword, he slowly cut away at the stone stalagmite. The inside of the stalagmite was hollow. When Zhuemo saw a thin layer of milk-like liquid at the bottom of the stalagmite, he couldn't help but be overjoyed. This milky white liquid was called stone milk. It was an extremely rare material for dan making. He hurriedly took out a small jade bottle from his bosom and carefully gathered all of the stone milk, not leaving behind one drop. When he saw the black gold worm that was turning on its spot restlessly, he first paused before laughing. He took out 3 drops of stone milk from the jade bottle and dropped it onto the body of the black gold worm. Haha, Ge eats meat, you drink soup. As the white stone milk touched the shell of the black gold worm, it was like water touching sand, quickly being absorbed into the black gold worm. The sheen of the black gold worm's shell became even finer and shiny. The black gold worm seemed to be full, becoming motionless on the ground. Zhuemo knew that it was absorbing the stone milk. He took out the bamboo cylinder and put it back in. Having gained the stalagmite fire and stone milk, Zhuemo was impatient to return to Wukong Mountain. When the disciples of Wukong sword sect saw Zhuo Mo's sorry state, they were all shocked. Zhuo Mo was focused on his goal, waving his hand at them, and like a burst of wind, headed straight for his own valley. Returning to the little west wind yard, Zhuo Mo instantly started to examine the stalagmite fire. Stalagmite fire was a rare kind of second-grade fire seed, and naturally had its own unique attributes. It belonged to the ranks of cold fire. Just this, it was extremely rare in low-grade fire seeds. Other than that, because it had been born in the humid, dark and cold of the cave stalagmites, it was both full of water and cold. Its flames would naturally give out cold moisture. In other words, it combined the two opposite qualities of water and fire in one entity. This attribute, it was even more rare in low-grade fire seeds. In the 5 elements, water and fire opposed each other. However, in the natural world, there were many strange entities that could perfectly merge these two completely opposing attributes together. The Li water sword scripture that Zhuo Mo practiced was to manipulate water like fire. From a certain perspective, it also contained attributes of water and fire. This was also the best and trickiest bit of the sword scripture. However, while Li water sword scripture had the qualities of water and fire, but it was far from the wonders of something natural like the stalagmite fire. Manipulate water like fire. It was still water in the end. It just borrowed the shape of fire. Stalagmite fire was truly something that had both fire and water. However, fire was definitely its primary attribute, so it was ranked into the ranks of fire seeds. There were many kinds of fire, but it was sorted according to the attributes. Generally, there were 4 major categories of hot fire, yang fire, yin fire, and cold fire. Hot fire was the most commonly seen fire. Its most important quality was its high temperature. The streaming fire from the streaming fire seal formation was a classical hot fire. Yang fire were sorted based on being masculine and yang. The golden crow fire that Zhuo Mo dreamed about was the epitome of yang fire. Yin fires, which were commonly also called ghost fire, were born from yin energy, such as Shura fire. Cold fire was also called icy flame. Its unique quality was cold and icy. They usually were born in extremely dark and cold places. There were also some strange and weird flames that were hard to sort. Those flames, they were usually the finest of flames and were treasures that every shoujo dreamed about. But no matter the type of flame, they would have the basic quality of fire, melting. This was also one of the reasons why the fire method was the most mainstream methods for dan making. In the next few days, Zhuo Mo studied the stalagmite fire. The present stalagmite fire was extremely tame. If he sent it east, it definitely wouldn't go west. Controlling fire depended on the consciousness. Zhuo Mo's consciousness was his strong suit and he could control it with ease. He could even use some complex manipulations. After playing for a few days until he was familiar, Zhuo Mo thought about making yin fire beads. Yin fire beads was only a general name. In reality, the yin fire beads that were made with different flames would all be different. Even the author of Yin Fire Bead chapter, who detailed so many fire seeds, he didn't have all of the fire seeds. There were hundreds of fire seeds recorded in the Yin Fire Bead chapter. Only 68 had a description of the related Yin Fire Bead. There was nothing on what was the effect of the Yin Fire Beads that would be created with the remaining fires. Stalagmite fire was one of the remainder. Zhuo Mo himself was extremely curious. What kind of yin fire bead would be created using such a special fire as stalagmite fire? He started to make his first yin fire bead. Chapter 94, Why do my eyes always have tears in the stone room? Zhuo Mo's eyes were closed, his legs coiled up. A ball of stalagmite fire was floating in front of him. Between the milky white flames, a yin bead could be seen. His hands continuously formed the spell. Following the changes in his fingers, bursts of Ling power were sent into the flame. The important part of making an yin fire bead wasn't Ling power but spiritual power. His consciousness carefully controlled the fire. The spell was extremely complicated and Zhuemo instantly felt a heavy burden, especially when he needed to endure these conditions for about an hour. The pitiful Zhuemo didn't know that usually making yin fire beads wasn't something a Zhuji Xiuzhe could accomplish. No one had told him. Pu Yao didn't tell him. The yin fire bead chapter didn't write of it. If he knew, he certainly wouldn't have tried. Sometimes, the ignorant had no fear. Zhuemo, who had no knowledge, never even considered if his cultivation was enough to make the yin fire beads. Faithfully following the instructions on the yin fire bead chapter, he carefully worked at making the yin fire bead. One by one, mysterious light characters were sent into the stalagmite fire and burrowed into the yin bead. However, there was no change on the stalagmite fire or the yin bead. Time slipped away. Sweat gradually formed on Zhuemo's forehead. Ling power was being used up too quickly. Based on this speed, the Ling power inside his body would quickly run dry. If his Ling power couldn't be maintained, the yin bead would be ruined. When he thought about it, the picture of the forest of signs in the free market proclaiming, purchasing yin beads at high prices, floated up in Zhuemo's mind. Something that even Jindan were willing to pay high prices to buy. Think of the price. The more he thought, the greater his flesh hurt. He seemed to see countless Jingshi waving their hands at him and flying further and further away. Damn it! As expected, Pu Yao's things weren't reliable. What, yin fire bead chapter, it was a mistake chapter. What situation was this? Zhuemo was panicked, angry and unwilling. Even though his own life wasn't in danger right now, but so many Jingshi waving goodbye to him wasn't any different from being repeatedly stabbed by daggers. If he wasn't still in the process of forging, Zhuemo probably would have ran over to Pu Yao to start arguing. Just at this time, in his sea of consciousness, Pu Yao unconcernedly raised his head. Forging this early? Young people are really full of motivation. Finishing, he closed his eyes, mind at ease, and listened to his sound tablet. If Zhuemo heard this, he would be spitting pints of blood. He was very pitiful, still ignorant of the situation. The only thing he was certain of right now was that he hadn't missed one word. Yet the situation in front of his eyes was completely different from the description in the yin fire bead chapter. According to the yin fire bead chapter, he only needed to maintain it for an hour. Right now though, his Ling power was almost empty. Was his cultivation not enough? Zhuemo finally realized the problem, but his realization had come too late. In the end, he couldn't bear to give up this yin bead, gritting his teeth and persisting. He'll keep going as long as he was able. He couldn't just stand by and watch as the yin bead was wasted. He suddenly thought about how he used his consciousness to monitor the Dan during Dan making. He took out a small portion of consciousness to carefully skimp and control the Ling power in his body. The usage of Ling power instantly lessened. However, if it kept on going like this, he still couldn't make it. Zhuemo gritted his teeth and divided out another portion of his consciousness to carefully control a small ball of Ling power. To avoid conflict with the continuously changing finger motions on his hands, Zhuemo led the burst of Ling power to the gushing spring point on the bottom of his feet. If he didn't have this little sliver of consciousness, Zhuemo basically didn't have the attention to spare to control the Ling power. Just the finger motions that could not be stopped were enough for him to deal with. But since he divided his consciousness, he could do three things as once. The feeling of his head being divided into three was extremely uncomfortable. Just a little while, and Zhuemo felt his head start to hurt. This was an extremely familiar feeling. Previously, when Xian Yan Shibua's sword essence had wounded his consciousness, it had been this feeling. It was that time that he had landed in Pu Yao's trap of embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. But for Jingshi, for yin beads, Zhuemo endured. Using all his power, he channeled the little bit of Ling power towards the gushing spring point. He started to continuously revolve the Ling power faster. The Ling power started to revolve faster and gradually, it formed into a little whirlpool. There seemed to be suction force coming from the bottom of his feet. The Ling energy in the surroundings seemed to slowly move towards the little whirlpool. This was something Zuemo had never tried before. But for Jingshi, Zuemo didn't care about it that much. Speaking of it, the inspiration for this came from the Li Water Sword scripture, 7 whirlpools. If this was the speed at which he usually absorbed Ling energy, then he would have run out. Without any other solution, Zuemo thought of this risky way. The Ling power on his feet quickened and Ling energy gradually was suctioned in. As the Ling energy that was sucked in entered the little whirlpool, the whirlpool started to grow, the speed increasing. The Ling energy in the surroundings seemed to be pulled, great amounts pouring towards the whirlpool in Zuemo's feet. Hiss! Zuemo inhaled sharply, the stalagmite fire floating in front of his chest trembling, almost collapsing. He felt like there were nails coming out of the ground, continuously being hammered into his foot. The gushing spring point might be one of the major points in the body, but Zuemo had never used it to absorb Ling energy before. Using it so heavily right now, it would be strange if it didn't hurt. But, for Jingshi, Ji will bear it. Zuemo tragically and furiously continued to channel Ling power, speeding up the rate of Ling energy absorption. The Ling energy from the air, when it was absorbed into the body, needed to go through a process of refining before it can be turned into cultivation. The purer the Ling energy, the stronger the power, the more easily it could be controlled and would not influence the mind. Zuemo couldn't care that much right now. Impure Ling power was still Ling power. At least, it could work in a pinch. Right now, he was like a starving man who hadn't eaten in 10 years. Any bit of Ling energy, he would ravenously pull it in. With the supply of new Ling power, Zuemo could finally relax. The quality of the Yin fire bead that would be forged wasn't something Zuemo was going to consider at this point. He would thank the heavens and earth if he could just finish. Ji's life is always so tragic. Zuemo was tragically angry. Absorbing the stalagmite fire, he had almost lost his little life. Forging the Yin fire bead, he was in great pain. The piercing pain from his feet, the jerking pain from his consciousness being split in 3, the tearing pain from the impure Ling power moving in his channels. Why do my eyes always contain tears? Because I love the Jingshi so deeply, still painful. Zuemo was shocked that he had the time for such nonsensical thoughts at this time, but he quickly didn't have the attention. Ling energy, not having been purified, it was much harder to control. The spells that he could easily complete before now became extremely difficult. The interior of his body was at a precarious equilibrium. The slightest shift and the balance would be broken, leading to a complete loss. Therefore, he bore the pain and the tears, carefully maintaining the equilibrium inside his body. In the rock room, Zuemo was like a whirlpool, the Ling energy surrounding him flooding in. As the Ling energy entered his body, the stalagmite fire in front of him grew. Zuemo's clothes moved despite the lack of wind, flapping around. The sweat on his forehead continuously poured down. Even the dense Ling energy in the rock room couldn't endure the ferocity of Zuemo's absorption and emptied out. Only the Ling energy from the Ling vein continuously entered the bottom of Zuemo's feet. The bottom of Zuemo's feet were now bright red, like heated metal. If one looked closely, they would discover the rock-hard leg now seemed as though it had epilepsy, contorting and jerking. When the last spell was cast into the stalagmite fire, Zuemo couldn't stand up anymore, collapsing to the ground. He was so tired he didn't even want to move a finger. His entire body was like a toad that had been desinewed, his limbs doing strange convulsing motions. Pain! As he lied down, he instantly started to wail. The tearing pain of his channels, the throbbing pain from his wounded consciousness, and the piercing pain from the bottom of his feet. They all reminded him how bad his state was. After wailing for a while, Zuemo struggled up and crawled to pick up the Yin fire bead. The gray Yin bead now seemed like clear glass. There were strands of white patterns inside, like clouds floating on a blue sky. So beautiful. Zhuo Mo's eyes became intoxicated. He felt that the pain he had just suffered through was worth it. He didn't know how powerful this fire bead was, but looking at such a beautiful bead, and thinking about how hard it had been to make it, did he bear to use it to test its power? Like it was a treasure, he carefully put it away. He struggled to stand and instantly shouted in pain. At some unknown time, his right foot had swollen into a ball. Just the slightest touch, much less walking, would result in a sharp needle-like pain. It really was people die for wealth, animals die for food. Zhuo thought as he maintained a strange posture as he jumped on one leg out of the rock room. For this fire bead, he had paid a serious price. It was relatively easy to deal with the wound in his consciousness. Embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation was specifically for healing consciousness wounds. What was more serious was the damage in his channels. He had to run to Fragrant Ginger Yard to find Su Qing for a few medical dan in order to slowly heal him. Thankfully, for Xiuzha, channel damage might not be usual, but it was one of the most common situations, so the sect didn't lack for treatments. When Su Qing saw Zhuo Mo's sorry state, she was very shocked. Zhuo Mo Shixiang's name was now known far and wide. At least, the name of the scalping zombie was known in the area around Wukong Sword Sect. The wastrels from Linging Sect, it had been quite a few days since they came to harass the sect. Who had beaten Shixiang this badly? However, it wasn't her place to ask. She hurriedly took out 5 medical dan, handing them to Zhuo Mo. Seeing Zhuo Mo take them and turn around, she hesitated, and then weakly added, "Shixiang, it's 1 piece of 3rd grade jingshe for each dan. In total, it's 5 3rd-grade jingshe." The one-legged Zhuo Mo's body shook. He almost fell down. He really made a great loss. And right now, he didn't have 1 jingshe left. He could only wave his hand, deferring, on the tab. 1 piece of jingshe stumped heroes. Oh. Su Qing nodded and then reminded Zhuo Mo, "Shixiang, the payment deadline is in 10 days, don't forget." "Shixiang is owing, let me see." Finishing, she took out a little book and flipped 2 pages, reciting, the materials that Shixiang had been using for dan making hadn't been cleared yet. Adding on today, in total, it is 30 pieces of 3rd-grade jingshe. Zhuo Mo felt everything darken. Chapter 95, A Method forced out 30 pieces of 3rd-grade jingshe. If this was not long ago, he wouldn't feel it was anything major, but for him at the present, this was undoubtedly a large debt. He could not make Golden Crow pills, so his most important income source was cut off. He did have a lot of beads, but he didn't dare to sell them. It had caused such a ruckus recently, and he had almost lost his little life. If someone found out that he had beads, no, if someone knew that the person who was selling beads last time was him, then his little life was definitely not going to survive. Jingshe was valuable, but his life was even more precious. There was still some time until the fiery red flower in the Ling Gardens would mature, and he couldn't exchange for jingshe right now. He could risk it and sell the moisture dan. But right now, he only had 3 moisture dan. The efficiency of the water method really made people speechless. He could sell the icy cloud grass for a pretty good price, but for Ling grasses this rare, if he sold it, it would be hard to buy in the future. Gather together 30 pieces of 3rd-grade jingshe in 10 days. These recent days, it kept on circling in his head. Even when he was nourishing his channels, he was still pondering it. But as time passed away, and the deadline of 10 days was coming closer, Zhuo Mo still didn't have a solution. Did he have to go sell some of the talismans? His gaze landed on the talismans on his own body and ached in pain. These were all the finest of the 3rd-grade talismans. It would be a pity to sell them. As to the vambrace and Ling armor Su Yi Shixiang and Yan Le Shibua sold him, the quality was so-so and wouldn't sell for a high price. Why haven't the people from Linging sect come even once these days? If a few more came, wouldn't this problem be solved? Not just 30 pieces of 3rd-grade jingshe, even if it was double that, it wouldn't be a problem. The people from Linging's sect didn't have one cheap item on their body. Those days were dangerous, but he had suddenly became rich. Zhuemo yearned for those days, the satisfaction and happiness that had risen. Suddenly, his mind moved. They weren't coming to find Ji could go find them. Once this idea popped out, Zhuemo instantly became excited. He jumped up from the floor, limping as he paced back and forth, his mouth muttering. The first reaction he had was, it was plausible. However, he restrained the joy inside and started to ponder the problems involved. Being challenged and going to challenge was completely different things. If he went to challenge at someone else's territory, if he wasn't careful, he would be swarmed. He needed to make sure the other side would respond, yet wouldn't enrage the other side so they would swarm him, and he couldn't alarm the elders of Linging's sect. He needed to think about this, make a good plan. In the dark room, Zhuemo rubbed his chin, his zombie face expressionless. Only that pair of eyes flashed with the light of Jingshi. The Dong Fu Sword Test Conference was an extremely hot topic. From the size and the influence, the Dong Fu Sword Test Conference naturally couldn't compare to the Sword Test Conference of the entire Kunlun realm. However, the generous prizes attracted many young experts who didn't have much wealth, dramatically increasing the skill level of the Sword Test Conference. As the skill level of the conference increased, some young experts who were not tempted by the prizes into attending left their sects to travel to Dong Fu. This was a rare chance to spar with other sections. They didn't care about the prizes, but such a great chance to gain experience, it would be too much of a pity to miss it. For these non-local experts, if they wanted to attend the Sword Test Conference, they needed to start from the preliminary Sword Test Conference. Consequently, even the preliminary conference became a very popular spectacle, lots of experts and a great viewing experience. Gu Rongping, coming from one of the 13 primary towns of Dong Fu, Clear Sky Lake, his Heart Lake sword was untraceable. From the first round of the prelims, he was undefeated for all 13 rounds. His appearance was extremely dignified and handsome, his conduct elegant, quickly becoming the best cultivation partner in the eyes of Dong Fu's females. Every one of his battles would be extremely noisy, the screams of the females ringing in the ears. Starting from the 5th round, those women had formed groups to seek information, and do all kinds of things to disturb the opponent. Gu Rongping quickly became the opponent others didn't want to encounter the most. Coming from another primary town, Gue Feng was the most eye-catching young talent. His little ghost sword was strange and hard to predict, the power was astounding. Adding on his unpredictable footwork, he was labeled the hardest opponent to fight with. Coming out of poverty, no sect, no family, Nan Menyang brightened everyone's eyes. His talent was strange, extreme strength. The 2nd grade, Vajra chant, was used with his Mountain Breaker sword, for an extremely offensive and powerful style, the broadsword moves strong like they could break a mountain. He attracted the eyes of many sections. Such a great piece of jade, if they would take him in, they would only profit. Other young experts like Nan Menyang who didn't have a sect or family started to come out and display their talents. The Dong Fu Sword Test Conference attracted the eyes of all the powers. Each sect was always hungry for talented disciples. No one who be bothered by having too many geniuses in their sect. A sect's prosperity and continuation wasn't dependent on one person. Sky Moon Jie's well-known sects, other than sending their disciples for experience, also sent out their elders to discover those youths of great potential. The little sects hoped to rope in those disciples with no family or sect. The bigger sects even dared to go after the geniuses of the small sections. Persuasion, prices, promises. Even the cause of it all, Tian Songzi, had never thought that his action of holding the Dong Fu Sword Test Conference would actually cause a shuffling of the powers in Sky Moon Jie. In the stone room, Zhuemo stretched out, his bones cracking. He expressionlessly opened his eyes glowing with a light like that of a wolf. The damaged channels in his body had fully recovered. His consciousness had also recovered. These recent days, he had cultivated very hard. The progression of Vajra Profound Sutra was a surprise to him. He had originally assumed that the gravestone version would be significantly slower. Yet after the initial slow period, Zhuomo's progression was extremely quick. However, the unexpected speed of improvement made him insecure. Many times, he had been doubting himself, suspicious that he was cultivating it incorrectly. Recently, due to the string of incidents that he encountered in cultivation, it made Zhuomo suspicious of anything to do with Puyao. Even though this, Vajra Profound Sutra, didn't come from Puyao, but the gravestone under Puyao's butt. Other than healing, Zhuomo spent all his time cultivating. There were still 3 days until the deadline. Fully recovered and ready, Zhuomo decided to set out. He had prepared very well already. Like the Ling Dan that could restore Ling power, even if it was 2 pieces of 3rd-grade Jingshi, Zhuomo still gritted his teeth and put 5 on the tab. Lingying sect was located at Lingying Mountain. Coming to the mountain gate of Lingying Mountain, looking at the magnificent gate entirely made out of jade, Zhuomo couldn't help but sigh at the wealth of Lingying sect. Lingying sect had 19 peaks, the area they occupied was more than 7 times the area of Wukong sword sect. Supposedly, Lingying sect had started out with 1 peak, but the sect leaders had been skilled at management and the other 18 peaks had all been bought by the sect leaders with Jingshi. Lingying sect's main gate faced the road, and could be reached by rock stairs. The location was extremely advantageous and many people passed by. In reality, Zhuomo's heart was beating hard. In Dongfu, Lingying sect's reputation was much more famous than Wukong sword sect. Lingying sect had more than a few dozen disciples that were in Zhuji alone. No matter how strong you were, if they all attacked you, you couldn't make it. But thinking about the 3 days until the deadline, Zhuomo felt a burst of courage. Looking at the mountain gates that were carved out of jade, Zhuomo wanted to tear it down and lug it home, then sell it for Jingshi. Calm. He needed to be calm. Zhuomo repeatedly told himself. Thinking about the plan he had made earlier. The disciples from Lingying sect had noticed this stranger very early on. Hey, what are you doing here? A Lingying sect disciple shouted as his brows furrowed, don't you know this is Lingying sect? He scanned Zhuomo and said scornfully, our sect's rules, those improperly dressed cannot enter. The other Lingying sect disciple said discontentedly, shitty, don't waste words with him. Just throw him out. This crowd of little minions, Zhuomo naturally didn't take them seriously. To say nothing else, but the fact that these 2 didn't have much on their body was enough for Zhuomo to disregard them. He was too lazy to pay attention to them, unconcernedly stating, call Wenfei out. The expressions of the 2 Lingying sect disciples changed. One of them lectured, you dare to call Wen Shixiang, I am Zhuomo of Wukong sword sect. Zhuomo lazily interrupted. The lecturing voice suddenly stopped, the faces of the 2 people changing. The scalping zombie, the 2 looked at each other, and the person who had been speaking shuddered. The other person instantly ran towards the mountain. Seeing the reactions, Zhuomo was very smug. It seemed that Ji did have a reputation. But then he became slightly discontent. This nickname was really not pleasing to the ear. A short while later, Wen Fei and a group of people dressed in a multitude of colors appeared in Zhuomo's vision. Zhuomo's mind became alert, the light in his eyes increasing. They were like that of a wolf, having just seen a herd of fat sheep. Each motion this crowd of people made, Zhuomo seemed to see human-like structures composed of countless Jingshi moving. When Wen Fei saw Zhuomo, his face instantly became dark. The old hate and the new hate collided and rose. He said coldly, brothers, what coming here today, is it to return the talismans you have borrowed from me and my brothers? Zhuomo silently thought that this person was cunning and really wasn't a friendly person. He snickered, borrow? Is brother Wen joking? Our sect's rules, anyone that comes to challenge must leave behind a talisman to show the result. If this one lost, Brother Wen can also pick a talisman from this one's body to serve as a memento. This is our sect's rules, 1 battle, 1 talisman. It's a pity that Brother Wen's luck wasn't very good and lost to this one. If Brother Wen wants to take it back, you can challenge me again at any time. However, if Brother Wen loses, you have to pay another talisman. Zhuo Mo bullshitted. Having his defeat being mentioned in front of the public, Wen Fei's face was dark but he could not argue. Tao Zhu'er saw Wen Fei was on the edge of losing control and thought the little rat was horrid. She could only stand out, then why has Brother Zhuo come this time? To show off in front of our sect. Zhuo Mo's spine straightened, standing taller, the light in his eyes increasing, his two hands fisted as he bowed in the direction of Wukong Mountains, his voice deep and grave. Miss Tao is joking. There were 5 Shixiang from Lingying's sect who came overall to challenge our sect. Our sect leaders have sternly taught us, our Wukong sword sect may be small, but needs to maintain our reputation. And has also said that matters between disciples should be resolved by disciples. This matter had started because of me and naturally cannot be given to someone else. I have not come with discourtesy but to ask for guidance from 5 of the Lingying sect Shixiang, one by one. After these 5 fights, no matter win or loss, this matter will be resolved. I heard that the Shixiang of Lingying's sect have always been magnanimous and the sect's conduct is just. To be able to spar with 5 of the Shixiang, one by one, this little disciple would be happy even if I didn't win. Please, help guide me. The passerbys only saw that at the gate of Lingying's sect, a thin youth was facing the wealthy experts of Lingying's sect, dignified and calm, not afraid, and all stopped in their steps. The words were loud and clear, extremely resolute. Passing through the air, the listeners felt their blood boil. Chapter 96, A Cold Light. Zhuo Mo made a very detailed plan. First, he had to declare his intentions. This seemingly useless action was in reality very important. It could effectively stop the incident from running out of control. If the two sides really ended up having a major disagreement, the ones who would lose would definitely be Wukong's sword sect who had less people. The second effect was to not alert the elders of the sect. Originally, Zhuo Mo had thought of making an even bigger spectacle so the chances they would all attack him together would be smaller. But if too many people watched, the face of Lingying's sect would be damaged, and the elders of the sect would quickly find his elders. The sect leader definitely wouldn't forgive him. Even more, Zhuo Mo had deliberately flattered them. What? Disciples have always been magnanimous and the sect's conduct is just. It was all to push the other onto the rack to roast. How could he make the other accept an one-on-one challenge? He needed to make sure they saw hope of victory. As long as the others felt they could win, they definitely wouldn't retreat. Especially when they were being challenged. Due to their confidence, their face, they would accept it. Consequently, Zhuo Mo challenged to fight 5 people one after the other. In his words, he had emphasized, one by one, twice. The one that was at a disadvantage in this plan was Zhuo Mo. His core idea was very simple. He would first place himself in a disadvantageous position. The disciples of Lingying's sect, no matter if it was confidence or face, it wouldn't be good for them to go over the line. One person battling 5 in a row. If it was like this and Lingying's sect still lost, these people could only suck it up. Their elders would have nothing to say and wouldn't have the face to go to Wukong Mountain to make trouble for Zhuo Mo. They couldn't afford the embarrassment. Of course, one person fighting 5 in a row was extremely disadvantageous for Zhuo Mo. He wasn't so confident to the point he believed he could win over all 5. But he didn't need to win all the fights. He had come for the Jingshi. Everything was fine as long as he made a profit. In other words, if he could win 3 out of the 5 fights, he would make a profit. Of course, the prerequisite was that the talismans on the losers didn't suck. The level of difficulty in winning 5 fights was too high. Zhuo Mo had never thought about it. Winning 3 battles, Zhuo Mo felt that it might be risky but it was possible. In the last little while, his cultivation had increased greatly and the initial merging between Li Water Sword Essence and Tidal Sword Essence had increased his confidence. So after thinking it over, the large debts caused Mo to make a decision and come. He had been very cunning with his virtuous words. When he saw the value of what this group of people was wearing, Mo's desire for battle rose. Luxury was a crime. Each of them had at least a few talismans that were not lower in value than what Mo had taken. He wouldn't be making a loss today. As to the one battle, one talisman, he had just made it up. In any case, no one would run to the sect leader to ask for proof. Great. This one admires Brothers Wa's bravery very much. Brothers Wa is right, disciples have a responsibility to the reputation of their sect. Since Brothers Wa has made a challenge, we will naturally receive it. Count me in. One person walked out of the crowd of Ling Ying sect disciples. This person was the eldest disciple of Ling Ying sect, Lin Yuan. His face was proud as he looked at Mo with a raised chin. Lin Yuan was the eldest disciple in Ling Ying sect. He had strong connections to Ling Ying sect, his family was a famous merchant clan in Sky Moon Jia, and his wealth was the greatest among all of the disciples. Due to the fact that his family's business provided great aid to Ling Ying sect, it caused his status in Ling Ying sect to be very special. Tao Zhuer looked in sympathy at eldest Shixiang, but tightly closed her mouth, not saying a word. Eldest Shixiang usually was very conceited, and in Ling Ying sect, where everyone competed on background and family, no one dared to go against him, gradually forming his conceited and arrogant temper. Yan Mingzi hid in the back, mockery in his eyes. Perhaps, out of all these people, he was the one who most accurately guessed Mo's aim. For some reason, when he saw Mo, he would think of the other's greedy expression when he was plundering. Hu Shan and the others had tasted defeat at Mo's hands and smirked in the shadows. There were many disciples in Ling Ying sect, constantly fighting, and their relationships were very complicated. They naturally were willing to see others trip up. That way, no one would mock them about this incident again. They had spread the name of the scalping zombie far and wide, but the great majority of people hadn't seen it for themselves. How could they believe it? Especially when it was the conceited and arrogant disciples of Ling Ying sect. They only felt that Hu Shan and the others weren't strong enough. They didn't even pay attention when Wen Fei was defeated. Rather, they scorned Wen Fei. So Wen Fei Shixiang, who was the focus of the elders, also had an inflated reputation. Even a guy from a little sect like Wukong Sword sect whose main profession was making medicine could defeat him. If that wasn't an inflated reputation, then what was? Wen Fei kept on feeling that there was smugness hidden deep in Mo's eyes. The two had fought before. He didn't believe one bit the words that had come out of Mo's mouth. When he saw eldest Shixiang Lin Yuan step out, he instantly knew that it was bad. He was very clear what eldest Shixiang's true power was. Even he had been defeated, how would eldest Shixiang even be a match? At this time, the cheers of the disciples caused the shadow over his heart to darken. Eldest Shixiang is mighty. As expected from eldest Shixiang. This composure, take a look at it. What's called being a role model, this is called a role model. Eldest Shixiang, let him have a taste of how powerful our Ling Ying sect is. What's scalping zombie, when he comes here, he's the only one getting scalped. The flattery flowed like a flood. The light on Lin Yuan's face as he stepped out was even brighter. The head was raised high, like an arrogant and smug rooster. Such honor, would they let eldest Shixiang take it all? Some opponents of Lin Yuan who were in secret conflict with him couldn't restrain themselves and stood out as well. Count me in. I'll come. Dare to bully our Ling Ying sect. Humph, this one will see just how good you are. Another 3 people came out, all of them heads of various factions in Ling Ying sect. If they didn't stand up now, it would be hard to maintain power in their factions. As expected, when the 3 came out, their faction members became excited and felt it was a great honor, calling out flattery. Wen Fei grimaced inside. He glanced at Mo out of the corner of his eyes. He felt that under the expressionless visage, the other would definitely be laughing. The people who step out, if it was machinations and scheming, partisan politics, they were very good. But if it was the sword? He saw a few more people wanting to join in and could only push hard at the Shixiang beside him and shout loudly. Chang Shixiang at the end. Chang Shixiang, who had been pushed out, looked with slight surprise at Wen Fei, and said, I had assumed you would have another fight. Why push me out? Please, Shixiang, help me take back my ring. Wen Fei had a pleading expression. A surprised expression made its way onto Chang Shixiang's face. Wen Fei's actions directly admitted that he wasn't a match. He looked in interest at Zhuo Mo. He turned his face to smile at Wen Fei, all right. After Wen Fei shouted, all the voices suddenly stopped. The people who had been tempted all shrunk back. The mood became slightly strange. The fiery atmosphere suddenly became silent, completely silent. The expressions of the three who had said they would fight became slightly unnatural. There wasn't much change in Lin Yuan's expression, but the uncontrollable wariness in his eyes made Zhuo Mo pay special attention to this Chang Shixiang. It seemed this person was strong. Tao Zhu'er, and the others, after hearing Wen Fei yell, Chang Shixiang at the end, they first paused and then became joyous. Ho, now that's something to see. Hu Shan said in a quiet voice, unable to suppress the excitement in his voice. That's so true. After Chang Shixiang fought 2 years ago, until now, I've never seen Chang Shixiang fight again. Yan Mingzi was extremely excited. Chang Shixiang has been resting his body and mind, Hu Shan said. Che, only ghosts believe that. Yan Mingzi said disdainfully. Tao Zhu'er suddenly turned around and added, even ghosts don't believe it. Lin Yuan was dissatisfied with the present mood. This damned guy called Chang, nothing good happened whenever he came out. He spoke to break the suffocating silence, all right. However, we'll say it first. If you lose, I can take a talisman from you. Naturally. There was still no expression on Zhuo Mo's zombie face. No one could see what he was thinking. He weakly added, but if you want this water drop sword, you have to wait until after the 5 fights for me to give you. I don't have a substitute flying sword. No problem. Lin Yuan generously said. He looked like he was already the victor. Lin Yuan's supporters became excited again. They widened their eyes, afraid of missing a detail. Thinking about the picture of eldest Shixiang beating this horrid zombie up, it would be very interesting. The water drop sword floated in front of Zhuo Mo's chest like a leaf floating in water. Chang Shixiang's eyes focused. His eyes were very experienced. The water drop sword looked like it was quietly floating, but in reality, it was making extremely small movements. It was like a snake that had already found its target and was waiting for a chance. This was an extremely tiny detail. However, he had to rejudge the strength of this weak-looking youth. In comparison, Wen Fei's response was much faster and his face much uglier. He had fought with Zhuo Mo before and he had a direct understanding of the other's strength. Right now, this opening move gave him great pressure that hadn't appeared when they had fought last time. There was only one explanation. In this interval of time, Zhuo Mo had become stronger. Zhuo Mo's legs were naturally spread out, his face slightly lowered, his eyes looking down like an old monk in meditation. Lin Yuan smirked and took out his flying sword. This was a flying sword that was entirely gold, countless seals carved on it. Between the seals, golden light flashed like ripples of water. Young Emperor's sword, 4th grade, he said proudly. Hiss, the Xiuzha in the surroundings inhaled sharply, their eyes hot as they looked at the sparkling gold sword. A 4th grade flying sword was very rare in Sky Moon Jie. Enjoying the envious and admiring glances of everyone else, Lin Yuan's mood was very good. He postured, you are a guest. This one will let you have 3 moves. Zhuo Mo didn't move. It was like he didn't hear it. Seeing the situation, Lin Yuan was dissatisfied with Zhuo Mo's lack of cooperation and snorted, if you are looking for death, then don't blame this one. Attack. The sound feel and Zuemo suddenly opened his eyes. It was impossible to describe the cold light that flashed through Zuemo's eyes. It was like an extremely sharp and vicious sword energy, and also like a poisonous snake that had been hiding in the shadows who suddenly bared its fangs. The water-drop sword that had been quietly floating in front of his chest disappeared. It suddenly appeared at Lin Yuan's neck, the sword point slightly spilling out a sword energy, just barely grazing Lin Yuan's neck. Lin Yuan's expression was dumb as he stood, maintaining his posture. He was afraid to move. On his well-maintained and lily-white neck, a drop of blood was very bright. The mountain gate of Lingying's sect was deathly silent. Chapter 97, Lin Yuan's plotting. Lin Yuan's entire body was still, beads of sweat sliding off his face, his eyes filled with terror. He could clearly feel the bone-aching coldness from the sword energy that was just touching his skin. All the hairs on his body were raised. He didn't tremble. It wasn't that he was bolstered by his bravery, but that he didn't dare to. He did his best to maintain his posture, afraid that the slightest bit of movement would cause the sword energy to move. For some unknown reason, he kept on feeling that if there was an accident, the sword energy at the tip of the flying sword would unhesitatingly cut into his neck. Maybe it was the steadiness of the flying sword, maybe it was Zuemo's eyes, maybe. It didn't matter that he knew Zuemo didn't dare to kill him, but he didn't dare to gamble. I surrender. Lin Yuan's voice was dry and raspy, nothing remaining of the past conceit and proudness. It echoed in a patch of silence and could be heard clearly. The coldness disappeared from his neck without any warning. Lin Yuan's heart finally settled down. He swallowed, looking in terror at Zuemo and the water-drop sword that was peacefully floating in front of his chest. There was only one thought in his head. This person couldn't be provoked. The spectators finally managed to react, dissolving into noise. Disbelief was on everyone's faces. No one could have thought that the entire battle would finish so quickly. When Lin Yuan took out the 4th grade, Young Emperor sword, the great majority had already assumed his victory. The gap between 4th grade and 3rd grade flying swords was an extremely large one. But, one move, and Lin Yuan lost. In the crowd of spectators, a cold light flashed through a pair of eyes hidden in the shadows. Lin Yuan focused. He pretended to be generous and opened, I lost. You can take down any of the talismans on my body. People like him, what they were afraid of losing was both the fight and their honor. Losing in battle wasn't major. He hadn't created his power based using physical power. But if he lost his reputation, then it was really sweeping the floor. His heart was still beating heavily. Please do not pick. Then the Ling armor on Brother Lin's body. Zuemo said. All right. Lin Yuan rushed to answer, afraid Zuemo would take it back. He had been afraid that Zuemo would pick the 4th grade, Yang Emperor sword. The Moonwater Black Turtle armor might be a fine 3rd grade Ling armor, and he had put a lot of effort into getting it, but it couldn't compare to Yang Emperor sword. Yang Emperor sword had been bestowed down by the sect leader. If it was lost, it would be bad for him. Lin Yuan rapidly took the Ling armor off his body, throwing it to Zuemo, deliberately pretending to be forthright. Brothers were really is skilled. Lin Yuan has no compunctions about losing. I'll take Brother Zua as my friend. In the future if you need any help, please speak. Zuemo raised his hands in a greeting. Brother Lin's demeanor is extraordinary, this little brother admires it. To be able to interact with people like Brother Lin, this little brother feels very honored. His hands, however, were extremely fast and impolite in putting the Moonwater Black Turtle armor onto his body. The Moonwater Black Turtle armor was entirely black, constructed of 36 black turtle shells, and forged with essence of moonwater. It was extremely durable. Zuemo could tell as he put the armor on that this was far better than the Ling armor that Yen Lushibwa had given him. It was both comfortable and breathable, and the Ling energy inside the black turtle armor slowly seeped into Zuemo's body, extremely pleasurable. Zuemo felt extremely good inside, disregarding the size that came from the surroundings. Of course, he knew that, based on just the price, the 4th grade, Young Emperor sword, that Lin Yuan had far surpassed this, Moonwater Black Turtle armor. However, this was also where he was the smartest. If he demanded the Young Emperor sword, even though Lin Yuan would give the Young Emperor sword to him due to face, but that way, this incident would increase in severity. A 4th grade flying sword, there wasn't many of those in Wukong sword sect. In all of the disciples, only Wei Xingxixiang's Splitting Rainbow was 4th grade. Coveting this flying sword, that was waiting for the others' elders to come find him. Not just that, he would also enter into an unsolvable disagreement with Lin Yuan. The other would certainly hate him. Also, Young Emperor's sword wasn't suited for Zuemo. At most, he could sell it for some jingshe. But, Moonwater Black Turtle armor, he could use it right now. Wearing it on his body, his defensive power would increase dramatically. He would have more confidence in making a profit this time. On someone else's territory, being too arrogant meant a terrible death. Zuemo got a bargain and gave Lin Yuan enough face. Lin Yuan managed to keep possession of Young Emperor's sword, and got face, his mood instantly rose. As for the Moonwater Black Turtle armor, just a 3rd grade talisman, he didn't care that much. Lin Yuan threw a jade scroll at Zuemo, generously saying, "This jade scroll has the directions to use this Moonwater Black Turtle armor. For this armor to land in the hands of a hero like Brother Zua, this little brother is very honored." He then scanned the surroundings, and said clearly, "Brother Zua is 1 against 5. Everyone should admire his courage. However, is our Lingying sect those that take advantage of others?" This unskilled one suggests that, after each of Brother Zua's fights, he can rest for an hour to recover his Ling energy, and be fair. How does everyone feel? Lin Yuan's actions instantly aroused the agreement of many people. Lin Xixiang is really a honest person. Didn't think that a disciple of Lingying's sect could have a demeanor like this. It really isn't easy. No matter if it was the disciples of Lingying's sect or the other spectators, they all spoke praises. Zuemo took the jade scroll, praising, "Brother Lin is really a genuine person." However, the faces of the 3 people who were going to fight next were extremely bad, their eyes hateful as they glared at Lin Yuan. Chang Xixiang, however, was staring at Zuemo, his expression pondering. Zuemo hadn't thought that the situation would change to be like this. Looking at the eyes of the other 3 people, Zuemo's heart was like a mirror. This Lin Yuan really helped him out. With this jade scroll, he didn't need to search on his own. 1 hour, it was enough for him to broadly grasp how to use this Ling armor. As to recovering Ling energy, the previous fight had been so quick he basically hadn't used any Ling energy at all. Lin Yuan bowed with his hands at Zuemo and proudly went back to his troop. That demeanor, there was nothing remaining of his expression when he had just lost. The shitty that were dependent on him gave a flood of praise for Lin Yuan's generosity. Lin Yuan pretended to calmly wave his hand, smirking inside. He didn't have good intentions in giving the instructions to the Moonwater Black Turtle armor, to Zuemo. He had gone first and lost. If his competitors won, then no matter how successful his performance was, it wouldn't make a difference. He had been generous in giving the Moonwater Black Turtle armor to Zuemo and suggested that Zuemo could rest for an hour between each fight so to undermine the people after him. Increasing Zuemo's power was attacking his opponents. If those people also lost, he would have lost honorably. If the other people wanted to copy him, it definitely wouldn't have the same effect. The other people were not able to object to Lin Yuan's reasonable suggestions. They could only stare with dark faces at Zuemo sitting cross-legged on the ground. An hour later, Zuemo finally opened his eyes. He was extremely happy inside. As expected, this Moonwater Black Turtle armor was very good. There were natural seal formations on the shells of black turtles. When they were used, flying swords would have a hard time breaking through. The second Linging sect disciple had been impatiently waiting long ago. When Zuo opened his eyes, he walked out. He threw the bright red cape off his body, revealing the tight clothes underneath. When the other tore off the cape, Zuo's eyes became straight. This guy. Disregarding the glowing Ling armor on his body, not saying anything of the finest third-grade vambrace, Zuo wouldn't even look at the bright red, crimson blood bull boots. His eyes were staring fixedly at the other's waist, wrist and chest. On the belt, there was a miscellany of paper seals. Oh no, a collection of paper seals that would make someone think this guy sold seals for a living. Second grade, turtle shell seal. Second grade, multiple ghost shadows. Second grade, domineering 5 thunder seal. On the wrists, a circle of one-use talismans were tied. Second grade, sharp-headed prickly snake shuttle. Second grade, 1-star galaxy. Second grade, light rain twin sparrows. There were a few pouches hanging on his chest, the smell of medicine wafting out. To Zuo, whose main profession was Dan and medicine, he was too familiar with this smell. Ling returning Dan, that was used to recover Ling energy, definitely not lower than second grade. Red flower Dan, used to stem bleeding, also not lower than second grade. The plum-colored Dan, that had a special smell, second grade miasma. On the outside of his legs, hanging on one of them was a second grade, Great Sun Moon Wheel, the other a second grade, Sky Net. Not just Zuo, all the spectators were completely dumbstruck. Yan Mingzi snickered, it looks like Wang Shixiang is going all out. Using his ultimate medicine seal style from the start. Hu Shan looked with fear at Wang Shixiang, who was standing fully armored. Only upon personal experience can one know the power of Wang Shixiang's medicine seal style. He had once fought against Wang Shixiang, and had been completely suppressed for the entire battle, almost to the point he couldn't raise his head. Yan Mingzi nodded sympathetically, the Shixiang that use medicine and seals in our sect cannot be counted, but to be like Wang Shixiang, to use the medicine seal style to such a degree, it had never happened before. Hu Shan, Wang Shixiang does have some real skill. Yan Mingzi added, his wealth is really abundant. The two couldn't help but fall silent. The disciples of Linging's sect might all have wealthy families, but there were still very drastic differences between them. Like Wang Shixiang, who dared to use seals and medicine to such a degree, if he didn't have the wealth to back it up, he wouldn't dare to do so. Everyone could understand the core philosophy of the medicine seal style, to use Jingshi to win. While everyone could understand the concept, but it was another matter if they could do it. Wang Shixiang's seal medicine style once again proved a truth that had existed for countless years. This world, when you throw enough Jingshi at someone, the great majority of the time, you could win. Maybe, as a person, Wang Shixiang was not as personable as Lin Yuan, but his seal medicine style was still very famous in Linging sect. When he tore off the cape and revealed all he owned, all of the Linging sect disciples suddenly became excited. That was because, in Linging sect, the absolute majority of disciples believed deeply in one truth: the person with the most Jingshi was the one that was right. To the Xiuzhe that were passing by, this scene was an extremely heavy blow. These days, there was someone who could armor himself to such a frightening degree. Chapter 98, Zuo's fury and heartache. After a long while, Zuo's soul finally returned to his body. Even though his own attire had improved dramatically over the past, but seeing the other armed to the teeth, Zuo couldn't help but lose his soul. Of course, this wasn't due to shock at the other's power, but shock at so many talismans, paper seals, and Lingdan. Damn it! Zuo's eyes were bloody red. He looked as though he wanted to strip the other bare. When Ge is penniless, you. Zuo, who had come to fight for 30 pieces of second-grade Jingshi, felt a burst of anger leave his chest and rush upwards. He was completely infuriated. Come! Wang Shixiang shouted confidently, and moved first. He was extremely wary of the flowing water that Zuo had sent out. Untraceable and fast, he didn't have a grasp on whether he would be able to combat it. Learning a lesson from Lin Yuan's fight, he decided to attack first, so after he spoke, he attacked. The multiple ghost shadow seal, that had already been gripped on both his hands beforehand, made a light bang. Everyone felt their eyes blur, and then 5 Wang Shixiang suddenly appeared on the battlefield. As expected, it is still this unrivaled and wretched starting move. Hu Shan sighed. Second grade, multiple ghost shadow seal. It could make 2 fake illusions that were exactly the same as the user. Using 2 of them simultaneously, there were instantly 4 illusions. Adding on the real one, it was hard to detect the real Wang Shixiang. This multiple ghost shadow seal evidently had been made well. It was extremely detailed to confuse the fakes with the real one. Other than cultivating a spell like sky eyes, ghost eyes, or yin-yang eyes, it was basically impossible to tell. Zuo hadn't practiced a spell like that. He also hadn't thought that the other would use up 2 second grade, multiple ghost shadow seal, at once. This expenditure, it was frightening. 1 second grade, multiple ghost shadow seal, would require at least 20 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi. 2 of them was 40 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi. Gu was aching to hit someone like you. Zua, a poor guy, Mo's fighting spirit started to burn like a prairie fire, almost lighting up all the blood in his body. Since there are 5 of you, then all of you can accept it. Zuo gritted his teeth, raising his hand for 7 whirlpools, and it completely surrounded all 5 figures. This move was an extremely wide-range attack, perfectly suited for dealing with multiple ghost shadow seal. The fake ones were, in the end, fake. When they were torn by the sword energies, they instantly broke. It evidently was not the first time Wang Shixiang had encountered this situation. He wasn't panicked, his 2 hands blurring, whoosh whoosh whoosh, 3 paper seals leapt from his hand. Turtle seal, Vajrapani seal, empty explosion seal. 2 layers of protection were added to Wang Shixiang's body. The inner green one was turtle seal, the outer one was Vajrapani seal. The moment the empty explosion seal was thrown out, it exploded with a bang. A large shock occurred on the battlefield, an invisible high-speed air wave viciously spread out. The 7 whirlpools that had just destroyed the fake illusions instantly were smashed to pieces by this explosive air wave. At the center of the explosion, Wang Shixiang was not afraid. He had just put on 2 defensive paper seals on his body. The effect was evident at this time. The empty explosion seal was astoundingly powerful, but it still could not break through the 2 layers of protective armor. He was untouched. The spectators jumped in fright. Such an unreasonable way of battle, this was the first time they had seen it. The blood of the Lingying sect disciples were all boiling. They all knew that once Wang Shixiang was at an advantage, just wait for the storm to arrive. Zuo was both sorrowful and furious. Second grade, turtle seal, 15 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi, 2nd grade, Vajrapani seal, 15 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi, 2nd grade, empty explosion seal, 30 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi. This string of numbers flowed across Zuo's heart. Wang Shixiang's practiced response allowed him to take the initiative. He unhesitatingly started his attack. Sharp-headed prickle snake shuttle, 1-star galaxy, and light rain double sparrow were like a pack of wolves that smelt blood, murderously howling as they leapt at Zuo. The howl of the sharp-headed prickly snake shuttle was able to shock a person's soul. The 3CUN snake shuttle suddenly transformed in midair into a thin black snake. Like a streak of black lightning, it displayed its vicious and sharp fangs. 1-star galaxy was 7 dots of blue light, like a galaxy. It seemed extremely beautiful, without any killing intent. When light rain double sparrow flew into the air, it turned into 2 blue fork-tailed sparrow. With simultaneous calls, they flew a strange shape and headed straight for Zuo. Wang Shixiang's move this time was extremely beautiful. All of Zuo's retreats had been sealed shut. He had no place to escape. These one-use talismans were much more expensive than paper seals. 30 pieces of third-grade jingsher, 40 pieces of third-grade jingsher, 30 pieces of third-grade jingsher. Another string of numbers flew past Zhuo Mo's heart. Every time a number flowed past, Zhuo Mo's heart felt pain. Up until now, he had successively felt pain 8 times. Any person who was in pain for 8 times, if they still seemed normal, then they were very skilled. But clearly, Zhuo Mo wasn't. After his heart broke for the 8th time, the anger in his chest instantly reached a climax. If fire was used to describe someone's anger, then Zhuo Mo was composed entirely of fire, blood-red flames streaming out of his body and into the sky. If he could tolerate this, what else couldn't he tolerate? No one could tolerate this. All the anger gathered and compressed at this instant. His eyes widened angrily, his hands moving as though he was throwing a large ball, crouching forward. The water drop sword gave a clear ring and flew into the sky. The 5th move of Li Water Sword Scripture, Banana Rain. Wang Shixiang felt the sky above him darken and reflexively raised his head. His pupils suddenly widened, his expression changing. Not paying any more attention to the talismans that had left his hand, he raised his hand and threw out 2, domineering 5 thunder seal, and then whipped his hand to throw out a little red umbrella. The little umbrella was extremely small, about half the size of a pen. When it was sent out, it started to grow, flying above his head and protecting him. This was a one-use second-grade talisman, sleeve umbrella. Even though it was a one-use talisman, it was extremely expensive. Even Wang Shixiang, when it wasn't a crucial time, didn't bear to use it. However, the present situation was dangerous and he had no hesitations about using this card. Once the 2, domineering 5 thunder seals, left, it turned into 2 strings of 5 interconnected thunder exploding in the air. The banana rain referred to the rain hitting the banana plant. Other than this, there was another meaning. It was rumored, in the ancient era, there was an 8th-grade talisman called the banana fan. A gentle wave of this fan would create endless flames. Many heroes had been killed with this little banana fan. It had then become one of the most famous 5 attributed talismans. The banana of banana rain had the meaning of fire. The rain was a rain of fire, the fire was a snowy white cold fire. The area of Lingying sect suddenly became cold. Even the completely jade mountain gate had a thin layer of frost. The fire had not arrived, but the coldness had explosively started to spread. Having merged in the tidal sword essence composed of countless icicles, the Li water sword essence had been completely changed. Originally, it had been a clear fire shape of water. Right now, it seemed slightly similar to Zhuo Mo's icy stalagmite fire. The fire rain which was white and cold gave off the feeling that it was snowing instead. However, no one was entranced by this beautiful scene. They were all shocked by the fatal murderous intent. In the white fire rain, sword essence crisscrossed, cold and icy, sharp, unable to be broken, endless. The 5 interconnected thunder crackled and howled as it rushed towards the slowly descending rain of fire in the sky. Many people silently praised the quickness of Wang Shixiang's reaction. The 2, domineering 5 thunder seal, were very powerful. If it could block for a while, the 3 one-use talismans he had put out earlier could successfully attack Zhuo Mo. The white fire rain that seemed to be slowly moving met the 5 thunder. Crack, crack, crack. Like the sound of electricity flashing in the water, the 2 strings of 5 interconnected thunder didn't even last for a second before strangely vanishing. Everyone who was watching all were shocked. In the middle of it all, deeply feeling the power in Zhuo Mo's move, Wang Shixiang wasn't just shocked. This time, his face was slightly pale. He was praying that the sleeve umbrella would be effective. As an afterthought, he quickly threw out the Great Sun Moon Wheel and Sky Net. Between protecting his life and killing the enemy, he chose to protect his life. Facing the 3 talismans that were gearing for him, Zhuo Mo didn't dodge. He activated the Moonwater Black Turtle Armor. A blue light suddenly erupted from the black armor. A circle of light that was like water waves suddenly appeared around Zuemo. To be secure, he also started Vajra Profound Sutra. A layer of dark gold quickly appeared on the arms, head, and other parts that were exposed to the outside. Between protecting his life and killing the enemy, Zuemo chose to kill the enemy. He was gambling. Gambling that the other would choose to protect himself. He had won his gamble. The 3 one-use talismans that didn't have a person controlling them seemed powerful. When they hit the water-like blue light around Zuemo, the circle of light did shudder fiercely, and Zuemo's insides were affected and took a few steps back. However, these 3 one-use talismans had no lasting power, and turned to light, disappearing into the air. Zuemo had blocked these 3 one-use talismans. That meant that his risky endeavor had been successful and had taken the initiative. Right now, he could easily control the banana rain. Anger boiling, Zuemo smirked coldly. This move had just begun. The sleeve umbrella managed to stop the fire rain for a while. Even though the sword energies in the fire rain created cracks when they hit the umbrella, but this talisman that he had spent so much Jingshi to buy now showed it was worth that many Jingshi, managing to block off the fire rain. However, he couldn't be on the defense. That would mean defeat. Wang Shixiang was an extremely experienced fighter. Looking at the seemingly untouched Zuemo nearby, he gritted his teeth. But when he saw the light coming off the other's armor, his hate towards Lin Yuan was even greater. However, he didn't become dumb due to anger. He knew, if he won this match, that was slapping Lin Yuan's face in front of everyone. The acting that Lin Yuan had done beforehand would be completely wasted. Only he could be the hero. His hands reached for his waist. Seeing the other take out a stack of red and green paper seals from his waist, Zuemo, anger burning up his body, seemed to see rows of numbers flying past his eyes, his heart also seeming to feel throbbing pain. Wastrel. Shameless. Zuemo bared his teeth, the furious anger that covered his body exploding, his anger reaching its maximum. He unhesitatingly sent out the killing move that he had been readying for a long time. Chapter 99, Seal Soldier, Layered Wave. The white fire rain that was covering the sky gradually started to gather, merging into a white pillar of rain. The rain pillar shook, creating sprays, one wave after another, like an enormous white snake shaking in the sky, continuously shaking its body to attack that red umbrella. The power kept on gathering, kept on increasing. If it was said that it had been the rain hitting idly the banana leaf before, now it was a storm, the intensity having multiplied. Sleeve umbrella was still a one-use talisman in the end. It had not been nurtured for a long time. At this time, it couldn't bear the attack anymore and scattered with a boom. Great Sun Moon Wheel wasn't a defensive talisman in the first place and was even weaker, basically torn to pieces. The Sky Net was also shredded by countless sword energies. The questions relating to the power of talismans were extremely complex. Other than their grade, it was also connected to the time the Shouja spent imprinting on the talisman. Usually, the longer they spent imprinting on it, the talisman would be more nimble and easier to control. The power would also be greater. This was why talismans had to be nourished. Other than this, some Shouja who were skilled in seal formations, as their cultivation increased, they would forge the seal formations inside the talisman. Like Zuemo's water drop sword, if it landed on Xian Yen Shirbu's hands, and was reforged, it could easily rise to 4th or 5th grade. But with Zuemo's pitiful cultivation, he didn't have the power to control it if it was 4th grade. It wasn't always, the higher the grade, the better the talisman. It depended on whether or not the talisman was suitable. The 4th grade, Yang Emperor sword, that Lin Yuan had was able to be controlled by Zhuji cultivators and was a very rare specimen. The benefit of a one-use talisman was that it did not need to be imprinted to be used. However, its power was far from the same grade talismans that had been nourished for a long time. People only had limited amounts of time and energy. The more talismans they had, the less they could spend imprinting on each talismans. Consequently, a true expert wouldn't have an abundance of talismans. They would only focus on imprinting a few and rely on those for most of their fights. If they could not easily manipulate their talismans in battle, it was an easy opportunity for their opponents. Talismans could aid or subdue each other. There were many patterns involved, and it was hard for people to predict all the situations encountered in battle. If they could stock up on a few one-use talismans that did not need to be imprinted, they would get a few more choices. It was the same rationale with paper seals. However, it was extremely rare for someone to use talismans and paper seals to such an extreme as Wang Shixiang. In the eyes of truly powerful experts, one-use talismans could work in an emergency, but it was too weak. In the lower-level fights, this kind of expendable strategy would almost always win. It was a pity that he had encountered Zhuo Mo who had comprehended sword essence. Sword moves that had sword essence as the core, the power would increase and would surpass the cultivator of the same power level. Only now did Wang Shixiang suddenly realize in shock that the white flame falling from the sky was not fire, nor rain, but sword energies. He almost could not believe this discovery. A guy in Zhuji, how could he give such a terrifying sword move? But in front of this many people, would Wang Shixiang be content with surrendering like this? He had his own pride. Red flashed through his eyes. He gritted his teeth. All in. A gold paper seal instantly appeared on his hand. Seal soldier. Someone from Lingying's sword sect who had been spectating shouted in shock, causing the crowd to rumble. Everyone's eyes were instantly attracted by the little gold paper seal. For the first time, Chang Shixiang had a serious expression. Among the crows, there was also a pair of eyes which suddenly became bright in the shadows. Chang Shixiang seemed to have perceived it, turning to glance over the crowd. Yan Mingzi muttered dazedly, "This is a seal soldier." Hu Shan gaped, speechless. The families of most Lingying set disciples were wealthy. Their experiences and knowledge wasn't something a poor guy like Zhuo Mo could compare with. Zhuo Mo might not recognize what this seal soldier was, but listening to the shocked murmurs of the crowd, he also knew that it was something magnificently powerful. However, at this time, his chest was filled with the sharp sword essence and he could not retreat. Wang Shixiang's face was solemn, his fingers moving, and his mouth quickly recited, "Powerful warrior protects master." As he finished speaking, a golden-armored soldier 3 zhang tall appeared beside him. The features of the golden-armored soldier were not clear. His entire body was enveloped inside the golden armor. He was standing without a weapon, but a heavy killing aura swept the whole field, and people couldn't not help but be in awe. The golden-armored soldier, as it appeared, turned his head up towards the white rain snake in the sky, his hand pushing up, and boomed, "Ha!" Everyone felt their ears ring, like someone had taken a hammer and gave a blow to them. Everyone was shocked. Even Chang Shixiang, who had been calm all this while, slightly changed his expression. It was like the mighty white water pillar met an invisible barrier and splashed in all directions. Wang Shixiang, who was positioned underneath it, was untouched. Zhuo Mo's chest felt like it was hit. He grunted. A sweet fishy taste spread out in his mouth. He could help but be aghast. What was this? At this time, he could not retreat. He refocused and once again attacked. Pew! Wang Shixiang, who had been standing underneath the golden armor soldier, suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. The golden armored soldier towering over him wavered and then vanished like it was an illusion. I lost. Wang Shixiang's face was as pale as powder. He clearly had been wounded. He staggered as though he could collapse at any time. Zhuo Mo finally released a breath. This fight had been really dangerous. If the other had used the paper seal at the start, he would have been the one to lose. His eyes couldn't help but look at the gold paper seal that had landed in front of Wang Shixiang. The gold of the paper seal was much duller than before. This seal soldier can only be used one more time. Knowing what Zhuo was thinking, Wang Shixiang said. Then I'll take it. Zhuo said unhesitatingly. Even though he didn't want to have a grudge with the other, but the impression that this seal soldier gave him was too deep. He had never seen such a powerful, terrifying paper seal. Wang Shixiang didn't waste words. He threw the seal soldier to Zhuo and then a jade scroll. This is the spell for the seal soldier. Zhuo carefully took the seal soldier and jade scroll. This seal soldier was something that could protect his life. Jingshi was important, but his little life was even more important. Something that could protect his life, the more he had, the better. This guy called Wang might be a bit of a prodigal son, and was of few words, but Zhuo felt he was much easier on the eyes than Lin Yuan. Wang Shixiang walked back among the disciples. He didn't have the energy to mind anything else, dropping to the ground, and sat cross-legged. His wounds were not insignificant. This battle had really been a series of up and downs. The people who had watched were also alarmed and shocked. Wang Shixiang's loss had caused many of the Lingying sect disciples' faces to turn ugly, especially the two that were up next, whose faces were like dirt. They were far from being as strong as Wang Shixiang, and had less jingshi than him. Just at this time, Chang Shixiang, who had been placed at the end, walked out. The Lingying sect disciples who had been making a commotion instantly quieted, their eyes looking straight at Chang Shixiang. Zhuo's expression changed slightly. He just had received light internal injuries. This guy named Chang, it could be seen he wasn't a simple character. Was it that he couldn't wait any longer? Chang Shixiang suddenly turned, beckoning at the two who were up next, "Come here." The two exchanged a look, hesitated but still forced themselves to walk over. "You two do not have to fight, you aren't a match," Chang Shixiang said serenely. Turning, he said to Zhuo, "Pick 2 items." Zhuo was in a daze. Looking at the two people, he couldn't help but hesitate. Chang Shixiang turned his face back, his eyes landing on the two. The two were like frightened rabbits, hurriedly saying, "Chang Shixiang can make the decision." Zhuo was not polite in demanding a belt and a pair of vambraces from the two. They were pretty good among third-grade items. The two did have pain on their faces, but obediently took it down, handing it off to Zhuo. When Zhuo took them, Chang Shixiang said to Lin Yuan, "1, Red Flower Dan, 3rd grade." Lin Yuan grimaced. Without a second word, he took out a 3rd grade, Red Flower Dan, throwing it to Chang Shixiang. Chang Shixiang then threw the 3rd grade, Red Flower Dan, to Zhuo, "Heal yourself first." Finishing, he sat down himself to rest. Zhuo wasn't sanctimonious and shoved the Red Flower Dan into his mouth. Up to now, this 3rd grade, Red Flower pill, was the highest grade Ling Dan that he had ever consumed. It turned into a hot stream, spreading through his organs, extremely comfortable. He didn't dare to slack off, channeling Ling power to dissolve the power of the medicine. There was a strange silence. It was like the peace before the storm, making people feel suffocated. Yan Mingzi said in a low voice, "Let's move back a bit." Hearing this, Hu Shan and Tao Zhuer also were startled awake, hurriedly falling back about 7 zhang. There were many people who also had the same idea as them. All the Lingying sect disciples seemed to understand each other and all moved back. The only people standing in their original spots were Wen Fei and a few others. The surrounding Xiuzhe watched this migration. However, they did not move. They felt that the distance right now was enough to be safe. "Ha, they'll regret it later." Yan Mingzi mocked. "Yes, the horror of Chang Shixiang, you would only believe it after you experience it personally." Hu Shan said empathetically. "Who do you think will win?" Tao Zhuer asked. "Do we need to even discuss it? The scalping zombie might have some skill, but can he compare to Chang Shixiang? Let's hope that there won't be any blood, there isn't anyone here that could stop him." Terror filled Yan Mingzi's eyes. Should we back up a bit more? Yan Mingzi shuddered and couldn't help saying. That's true, Yan Mingzi nodded. Do you have the spirit traveling seal? I have too. Hu Shan took out 2 spirit traveling seals. Give me one. Yan Mingzi hurriedly snatched one, holding it in a death grip. At the side, one person couldn't stop himself. Do you have to exaggerate so much? Hasn't Chang Shixiang been relaxing and cultivating his personality? Yang Mingzi, Hu Shan, and Tao Zhuer first paused and then all had sympathy on their faces as they looked at the person. The person couldn't bear the three's gaze, his face flushing. Chang Shixiang is always writing sutras every day. I've seen it myself. He also raises ling beasts, so dumb. Yan Mingzi shook his head. Idiot. Hu Shan rolled his eyes and spat out. Let's move back a bit more. Tao Zhuer directly disregarded the person and said to the other 2. At this time, Zuemo finally stood up. Zuemo's battle experience was now extremely rich. What people he could fight, what people he should avoid, Zuemo was very clear. I surrender. Which item do you want? Zuemo blurted out very quickly. He had come for wealth. Now that he had made so much, even if he surrendered this one, he had already won 4. Such rich prizes, he was already content. From a glance, it could be seen that he wasn't on the same level as Chang Heng and definitely had no chance of victory. It would be better to admit defeat. If he was wounded by the other, then he would have a deficit. As a businessperson, a sense of when to retreat was essential. Zuemo comforted himself. Chang Heng started at Zuemo for a beat and smiled. You are a smart person. I just know my limits, Zuemo said as he raised his hands. He wanted to leave very badly. The longer he stayed, the more he felt this mediocre-looking man was dangerous. Chang Shixiang can pick whatever item you want. This little brother will present it with both hands. Chang Heng was not moved, his eyes looking in the distance, indifferently saying, if you can survive one of my moves, then leave with the things. If you can't receive it, then leave behind everything. Zuemo's heart jumped. The easier Chang Heng talked, the more unsafe he felt. Chang Shixiang, this little brother, the place I stand, you have to abide by my rules. Chang Heng didn't turn his eyes. The surrounding crowd were silent. Even the air seemed to become dense and murderous. Everyone couldn't help but stop breathing. They all knew that the most spectacular part of the day had arrived. All of the Lingying sect disciples were excited. The dominance that Chang Heng Shixiang displayed totally conquered them. Even Tao Zhuer's large eyes didn't want to leave Chang Heng Shixiang's body for an instant. Up until now, Chang Heng hadn't displayed any power, and didn't make any motions. However, he was like the owner of the land, extremely matter-of-fact, and unable to be doubted. Zuemo took a deep breath. He realized that he could not avoid this fight. The request the other gave was not outrageous. He only had to endure one of the other's moves, and it would count as Zuemo's victory. If he didn't agree, then all the victories he had today would instantly turn to dust. The other had enough reason to surrounding him. The move that Chang Heng used was the one that Zuemo used before. He first put himself at a disadvantageous position, and then forced the other to walk the path he picked. This feeling, it really was bad. Zuemo shook his head, and threw these distracting thoughts to the back of his head. Today's battle, it was all on this one move. However, even a Ningmai cultivator, they shouldn't be able to say they could get rid of him in one move. Since he could not avoid it, then come. Thinking it through, Zuemo adjusted himself into position and said calmly, as Shixiang wishes. Not bad. I like you, Chang Heng nodded in praise. He then opened his clothes, revealing a bare upper half. In between his clavicles, there was a copper ring. What was that for? The Xiuzha in the surroundings were also puzzled. They began putting their heads together and discussing it. It was the complete opposite of the Ling Ying sect disciples. Excitement was on all of their faces, each one arching their necks, staring tightly at Chang Shixiang as though some exciting thing was going to happen. Zuo was also slightly puzzled, but he kept his guard up, not daring to slack off. Chang Heng closed his eyes, his right hand touching the copper ring between his clavicles. Then he did a move that shocked everyone. He slowly pulled on the copper ring. Hiss! Connected below the copper ring was a blood-red blade. It was slowly pulled out of the flesh of Chang Heng's chest. There wasn't any pain on Chang Heng's body. Quite the opposite, his expression was slightly warm and intoxicated. Zuo Mo's hairs stood as he looked at the weird and bloody picture in front of him. Not just Zuo Mo, but almost everyone in the surroundings had a terrified expression. Some that were less brave already had run to the side and started to heave. Too savage, Yan Mingzi trembled, saying with excitement. When this blood-red sword was completely pulled out of Chang Heng's body, the terror reached the bones of every single person. This was a very strange sword. The sword was not long, about 1 qi long, 2 fingers wide. The body was entirely blood-red. There was no sword guard or grip. The blood-red blade connected directly to the copper ring. The width of the ring was just enough to be worn on the fingers. What was strange was that there was no wound on Chang Heng's body, the spot between his clavicles was smooth and markless. The scene was just a man holding a slightly strange red flying sword, but anyone who had seen what had preceded it definitely would not be able to forget it. Such a weird and bloody scene. Chang Heng opened his eyes, his expression normal. His voice hadn't changed at all compared to before. This ring sword is called Blood Spider. Zuo felt his skin prickle. As though he was facing a great enemy, his hands as they held the sword couldn't help but start sweating. If the pressure that Chang Heng had given him before could be said to be faint but omnipresent, then the Chang Heng with Blood Spider on his hand gave him an ocean of pressure, without any place for him to escape. The sudden change in pressure could cause those who had weak minds to collapse in that instant. Zuo had a feeling that everyone in front of his eyes gradually became dyed with a layer of blood red. Zuo reflexively tightened his grip on the water-drop sword. The sword suddenly passed him a warm and serene water essence. Even though it was extremely faint, at this time, it dramatically decreased his nervousness. No! If this kept on going, he would lose without even fighting. Zuo closed his eyes and stopped his breathing. Then he started using embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. The Ling power in his body started to move, and his consciousness started to become lively. Gradually, the terror in Zuo heart started to decrease. His fretful heart gradually became serene. At some time, a bloodline appeared in Chang Heng's eyes. He gave a praising glance at Zuo. In the eyes of other people, this look caused a coldness to spread from the bottom of their hearts, like a savage blood spider coldly focusing on his prey. He lightly swung his finger. The bloody spider sword, on his finger spun rapidly, creating a bloody red circle of light. As the blood spider sword spun faster, it started to ring. Gradually, the ringing became an extremely icy hiss. An extremely domineering and savage presence, with Chang Heng at the center, appeared. At this time, the spectators nearby had pale faces. They all wanted to turn and escape. However, they found that their legs were wobbly. Crash, crash, they all fell to the ground. There was only someone wearing a black gauze hat standing at his original spot. His clothes flapped in the wind, but the gauze in front of face didn't move at all. What could be barely made out through the gauze was a pair of narrow and knife-sharp eyes. Zuo felt that he was in a sea of blood. Enormous blood waves roiling and howling, smashing against each other, blocking out the sun. He was like a little boat, extremely small, floating uncertainly as though he would be swallowed by the gigantic waves at any instant. Suddenly, a blood wave rose in front of him, transforming into an extremely ugly blood beast, opening his jaws and howled as it leapt at him. Gripping the water drop sword, having stopped his breathing and closed his eyes, all of Zuomo's Ling power had all been sent into the water drop sword. The water drop sword was like a little river, waves rippling, changing constantly. As the gigantic mouth was going to swallow him, he slowly raised the little river in his hand. The little river that had been the water drop sword suddenly changed. Flames rose out of the water, spreading a shocking cold. The short little river moved and swayed like the tide. If Zuomo could see it, he would find that the present appearance of the water drop sword was the same as the sword river in his consciousness. Blossoms of water-shaped flames, as they spat, they would also create countless icicle-like sword energies. The movement of the tide continuously became larger, the water-shaped flames burning fiercely, the icy energy rising. It was as though Zuomo was holding a ball of flame in his hand. All the clothing on his body turned to pieces. With an angry shout, using all the energy in his body, from the bottom rising against the current up, he forcefully sliced. The first time after he merged the sword essences, Li water burning heavens. Chapter 101, All In. A handful of glowing water jumped like a fire, the fire turning from clear to a deep blue, a faint mist surrounded the flame, shooting upwards. Changheng gently threw out the blood wheel that was rotating on his hand. The moment the blood wheel left, everyone felt their eyes darken. The blood wheel turned into a ball of blood mist, heading for Zuomo's head. The blood mist that boiled restlessly was like a strange beast, occasionally giving a low howl, like there were countless ghosts shrieking and screaming, shaking the souls of listeners. The blue fire-carrying mist and the blood mist smashed together. Ding! A crisp sound like that of an icicle rang out. Immediately after, countless howls and screams came out of the blood mist. The spectators felt their eardrums hurt. The people who were close had blood streaming out of their ears. Pew pew pew. The blue flame continuously released countless tiny sword essences. Anytime the blood mist neared, it would be frozen by the icy and sharp sword essences into tiny red ice drops. The sword energies of the blue flame seemed to be endless. Having been wounded, the restless blood mist was like a provoked beast, even more furiously boiling. The shrieks coming out of the blood mist even more piercing and furious. The center of the blood mist seemed to suddenly collapse. The blood-colored mist started retreating at an astounding speed. In the blink of an eye, the 10-zhang-wide blood mist had disappeared. On the empty ground, there was a blood-colored spider. The spider was slightly taller than Zuomo, and had numerous black patterns all over its body, which seemed like character seals. Big and small reverse hooks covered the spider's legs, gleaming with a cold light. Anyone who saw them did not doubt that if they were caught, flesh would be easily ripped out. The eyes of the spider, each the size of 2 fists, stared emotionlessly at Zuomo. Zuomo's heart was shocked. The blood spider in front of him didn't have the powerful presence of the blood mist before it, but it made him even more wary. However, at this time, his heart was completely filled with sword essence. Even if he was facing a terrifying blood spider that he had never seen before, his mind had never wavered. Seemingly feeling the resolve in Zuomo's heart, the blue flame, carrying along its mist, turned into a stream of light, shooting at the blood spider. The blood spider suddenly lifted its head, and opened its mouth. A piercing and dissonant shriek flooded from its mouth. With it as the center, the air seemed to have been pulled, and rippled, visible to the naked eye. The flame that had turned to a stream of light suddenly brightened. The mist that surrounded it became denser, speeding up even more. With the flame as the center, countless tiny sword essences crisscrossed, forming a shapeless sword essence net. Zuomo's body slightly wavered, shocked inside. The shout from the blood spider actually could harm his spirit. If his spirit wasn't much more powerful than normal Xiuzha, he would have been greatly wounded by that. The surrounding Xiuzha were much worse off. Most of the Xiuzhe that had been lying on the ground paled. Their consciousness were greatly wounded. Only the Xiuzhe that was wearing a hat was not moved, seemingly unaffected. Lucky we went back far enough. The Ling Ying sect disciple that had been objecting to Yang Mingzi and the others was full of relief. Even though they were far enough away, but he still was affected. His chest seemed to be roiling and wanting to throw up. His eyes as they looked at Chang Shixiang instantly filled with awe. No one paid attention to him. Yan Mingzi gaped. Pointing at Chang Heng, he suddenly turned his face to ask, who said Chang Shixiang was relaxing and cultivating his mind? Hu Shan and Tao Zhu'er looked in shock at each other. Chang Shixiang's power, compared to a few years ago, was even more terrifying. The battle had reached the climax. The blood spider didn't dodge. Instead it raised its head and reached with its forelimbs to slice at the water drop sword. The stream of blue flame that was the water drop sword accurately hit the blood spider's forelimbs. The moment the two impacted, a thick bloody light rose around the blood spider, sheltering it. The blue flame sword essences hit the blood light around the blood spider, icy spraying but basically unable to break its defense. Boom! The true body of the blue flame directly hit the blood light. The blood light, which hadn't moved at all before, suddenly started to shake. The bloody light moved relentlessly as though it could shatter at any time. Arg! The blood spider gave a sky-shaking howl, its voice filled with fury. The blood light around its body suddenly increased, the thick blood light seeming composed of countless amounts of fresh blood, so congealed it seemed real. Zuo instantly felt the pressure increase. The pressure in front of the water drop sword was so great that he had never felt it before. It was like murderous intent was hitting in from all directions. The water drop sword was like a fish caught in a net. At this time, Zuo didn't have any other thoughts. Jingshi, talismans, they were all thrown out of his head. In his eyes, there was only the blood spider and the water drop sword. The Ling power furiously moved. He didn't need any benefit or simulation. The blood spider gave Zuo a pressure of death that he had never felt before, forcing him instinctively to use his full power. He forgot this was a spar, forgot the agreement of one move. All the Ling power in his body was channeled into the water drop sword. The flood of battle spirit, and the terror of death at the bottom of his heart, entwined like twins, deeply provoked Zuo. All of his calmness, all of his intelligence turned to dust at this time. What remained was the most basic instincts, the instinct to fight, the instinct to live. At some unknown time, Zuo suddenly floated into the sky. The next scene struck everyone completely dumb. What is that? Yang Mingzi stammered to ask. Hu Shan's face was full of shock, unconsciously muttering, "It isn't possible, this isn't possible." Tao Zhu'er's face paled like paper. Wang Shixiang, who had been sitting, suddenly jumped up, looking in disbelief at Zuo. The expression on Wen Fei, who had been watching attentively, suddenly changed. Lin Yuan, not far away, also stared in shock. The black gauze of the hat-wearing Xiuzhe, who had been standing steadily, rippled fiercely, like a furious wind blew past. Even Chang Heng, who was coldly standing behind the blood spider, showed shock. The Ling energy surrounding Zuo as he floated in mid-air, headed for Zuo at terrifying speeds. He was like a whirlpool, crazily absorbing the surrounding Ling energy. In reality, the Ling energy at the gates of Ling Ying sword sect wasn't dense. However, the suction inside Zuo's body was too powerful. After he sucked in the Ling energies in the surroundings, he started to pull on Ling energy from further away. This kind of rough suction of Ling energy, no one had seen it before. Even more, this was sucking in Ling energy as he fought. This was too fantastical. Zuo didn't know the shock he gave others. Right now, he was like a beast at death's edge, all of his attention on the blood spider in front of him. He put all the ideas he could think of into use. Gambling everything. He completely disregarded the tearing pain from his channels. Without calculating the consequences, he furiously took in the surrounding Ling energy. The blue flame became even brighter. As the impure Ling energy was sent in, it didn't burn quietly anymore, but with crackles and bangs. If the blue flame had previously been as quiet as a virgin, then the present flame was like an infuriated brawny man. A sliver of fear came through the blood spider's eyes, but it quickly became even more furious. This average little boy in front of it dared to repeatedly challenge its dominance. It had even been, for one moment, afraid of him. He was completely infuriated. Aro! The size of the blood spider exploded. In the blink of an eye, it had increased multiple times. Standing there, it was like a little mountain. The blood light on its body turned from light to dark. It was like there was a thick layer of congealed blood covering its entire body. Occasionally, dark red blood would drip to the ground, sending up wisps of green smoke, a burnt hole appearing on the ground. Everyone knew that the battle had reached the most crucial time. Suddenly, one red light and one blue light moved at the same time. They chose to use the most straightforward and brutal way, like two raging bulls, crashing together. Boom! Everyone felt a blinding light and couldn't not see anything else. The ground under their feet shook. Other than feeling fear, they hurried to steady themselves. Before they could open their eyes, they heard Suomo's voice come out of the air. Chang Shixiang's teachings, this little brother has managed to pass and will bid farewell now. See you in the future. When everyone opened their eyes, where could they find Suomo's figure? The last round just now had been too amazing. Almost everyone had lost focus, dumb where they stood. When they regained their minds, and looked towards the field, the blood spider seemed depressed. The several CUN deep marks on the two forelimbs were alarming to see. There was nothing remaining of the bravado and fierceness just before. Changheng Shixiang was standing, eyes closed, his legs buried in the rock floor up to his knees. He was motionless. No one dared to go closer. A moment later, a sword light landed from the sky. It was an elder of Lingying sect. He scanned the surroundings. Noticing the wounded and dejected blood spider, his face slightly changed and sternly shouted, "What just happened?" The disciples murmured. Lin Yuan saw the eyes turn towards him and could only go forward to give a simple narration. Wukong's sword sect is too bold. The light in this Lingying sect elder's eyes grew as he snorted coldly. When his eyes moved towards Changheng that was still motionless with closed eyes, joy suddenly came into his eyes. Just at this time, Changheng opened his eyes, a flash of blood red flashing and disappearing from his eyes. He raised his head and howled to the sky. Wen Fei first paused and then had a gleeful expression. Changheng was extremely refreshed. He had managed to smoothly break through the barrier that he had been stuck at for a long time. Today, he finally entered Ningmai. After a while, he looked in the direction that Zuemo had disappeared in, an amused expression on his face. The Xiuzhe wearing the hat looked for a moment at Changheng and turned to leave. On the gray-beaked goose, Zuemo's face was gray. His clothes were covered with blood. He had been gravely wounded in the last round, and had spat blood multiple times. In order to leave earlier, he had forced his Ling power out and relied on it to head straight towards the place he had put the gray-beaked goose. This was why his wounds had been worsened. He only had one thought in his head, to get back even quickly to the sect. Heavily wounded, Zuemo felt his body was increasingly heavy. He motionlessly laid on the back of the gray-beaked goose and became unconscious. The gray-beaked goose seemed to know that the situation was grave, powerfully waving the wings and furiously flying in the direction of Wukong's sword sect. Suddenly, a five-colored light lit up on Zuemo's chest. Inside the five-colored light, lines of green-colored energy came out and, following the channels in the body, spread into Zuemo's limbs and organs. In the consciousness, Pu Yao was looking in interest at this scene. So interesting, I really want to crack it open. Chapter 102, Couldn't Understand. Zhuemo slowly woke up. His face was pasted to the ground, dirt in his mouth. He felt slightly secure once he realized he was in his little yard. When he inspected his body, his heart finally relaxed. The situation was better than he had expected. Even though his injuries were serious, especially in his channels, but it was much better than he had imagined. What he was most afraid of was damaging his basic vitality. That was a fatal wound that even Jindan Xiuzhe could not save him from. Still all right. He struggled up from the dirt floor. He was used to the soreness of his entire body. Thinking about it now, he always ended up causing his own sorry state. If it happened multiple times, then one would get used to it. Even something like enduring pain was like that. However, when he saw the gray-beaked goose splattered like mud lying nearby, he was very shocked. He hurriedly stumbled over. It definitely was this female bird's labor that he could come back. If he didn't have it, he would have been very badly off. Coming to the gray-beaked goose, he carefully inspected her before his heart settled down. This female bird was just exhausted. Zhuemo was very moved. Running to the stone room, and taking out the stone milk that he treasured so much, he dropped 3 drops to the gray-beaked goose. Silly bird, Ji is pretty good to you," Zhuemo said to himself. For Xiuzhe, using stone milk by itself didn't have much of a beneficial effect, but for Ling beasts, this was a natural treasure. Other than Zhuemo, no one would feed 3 drops of stone milk to a second-grade gray-beaked goose. From the perspective of Jingshi, 3 drops of stone milk was much more valuable than a second-grade gray-beaked goose. However, this person and bird had great camaraderie. Even though this female bird had once taunted him, but Ji is generous, and won't hold a grudge with you, silly bird, Zhuemo thought. The effect of the stone milk was, as expected, extremely clear. Just seconds later, the gray-beaked goose stood up again, but looking at the gray-beaked goose, like a person, her wings tucked behind her back, puffing up her chest, walking the steps, Zhuemo was dumbstruck. But it didn't manage to maintain it for very long before it became fretful, jumping about in the yard, jumping up and down. Zhuemo gaped with wide eyes. But after a while, even jumping would not satisfy it. That pair of wings started to endlessly make strange movements. It looked like a convulsing strange bird dancing. It was really too horrible to look at, no sense of beauty at all. Zhuemo could only give this cruel review. After thinking slightly, he understood what had happened. He had given too much stone milk to the gray-beaked goose. The potential of the gray-beaked goose was very average, and was not able to tolerate such a large amount of stone milk. Too much of the medicinal power was unable to be absorbed and caused it to act so crazily. Suddenly, Zhuemo paled. This silly bird was running towards the Ling fields. "Stop!" Zhuemo couldn't resist and swore, "If you ruin my fields, I'll break your legs." Frightened by Zhuemo, the gray-beaked goose rushed to a stop and its head plunged into the ground, head down and tail up. It was still slightly frightened of Zhuemo. When it swayed as it pulled its head out of the ground, Zhuemo saw the situation was bad and yelled, "Are you dumb? Go fly into the sky." The gray-beaked goose used its wings to hit its head, its face giving an expression of realization. Then it shook its head drunkenly, flapping its wings and staggered as it shot into the air. Zhuemo patted his chest in fear. These days, even birds were this strong. Having managed to stabilize the silly bird, Zhuemo dragged his half-crippled body into the stone room. Once he crawled in, he entered meditation. He spent much longer in meditation than before, a full 20 hours before he woke up. Even though he hadn't been wounded too severely, but the wounds in the channels inside his body were not insignificant. The damaging power of the impure Ling energy was extremely serious. At that time, he really had been crazy. For Jingshi, to not even care for his life. However, thinking back to it, he felt that it wasn't right. Why had he been so reckless? He couldn't pin down a reason. That last attack, there were many places for him to savor. He and Chang Heng were not on the same level of power. It could be seen from the fact the other had forced him to the precipice with one move. Thinking about it now, Zuemo still felt fear. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about Chang Heng's level of power, but he hadn't thought he would have struggled so much to stand up under just one of Chang Heng's moves. It really was a miracle that he was only wounded this little. He wasn't dejected. From level of cultivation, there was too much of a difference. Chang Heng was at the peak of Zhuji, someone heading for Ningmai. Zuemo was only the 4th level of Zhuji. However, he was now at the 5th level. Just now, after a meditation of 20 hours, he had accidentally entered the 5th level. This wasn't all of the gains from the battle. That was why Zuemo wasn't leaving after he woke up, but sitting, savoring the entire battle. The battle had been extremely short, just one move, yet the changes involved were not simple. Quite the opposite, there were many changes that Zuemo had never even thought about before. He had even done something as damaging to himself as sucking Ling energy into his body to just barely make it through one of the other's moves. There were too many actions of Chang Heng that were worth learning from. The precision of Ling energy usage, the attack on the consciousness, the usage of presence and pressure. This meditation was another 10 hours. When he truly finished, he felt that he was extremely hungry. Running to the stores, he found some Ling grains. Not caring about his cooking skill, he personally made a Ling grain meal. The terrible cooking skills caused the taste of the meal to be rather bad. Zuemo did swallow up every bit of it. The Ling energy contained in the Ling grains was extremely useful. After filling his hunger, he started to inspect his spoils of war. When he put all the trophies out, he instantly became excited. Moonwater Black Turtle Armor, Seal Soldier, 1 3rd-grade belt, and a pair of 3rd-grade vambraces. He was familiar with the attributes of Moonwater Black Turtle Armor. The Seal Soldier could be used only one more time. That was something to use to save his life at a crucial time. Zuemo naturally wouldn't be so dumb as to try it out. After memorizing the spell, he carefully put away the Seal Soldier. The important ones were the belt and the vambraces. Zuemo had to admit that he had slipped up on the belt. The gold glittering belt only had one formation, martial bearing. Zuemo thought this was a formation that had no use at all. Its purpose was to make the presence of the wearer more outstanding, and look stronger and magnificent. In other words, this was a decorative formation. Zuemo wanted to spit blood. He felt that it could be understandable that women would wear talismans of this type, but a guy, wearing a belt carved with, martial bearing, formation in broad daylight, they were too much of a show-off. The belt was made up of soft gold sky silk. The quality was outstanding. Such good material carved with a formation that had no real use, what a waste. Zuemo was extremely frustrated. Why did he pick such a useless item? However, what could be celebrated was that the vambraces did not disappoint him. There were 2 formations on it, 30,000 Kati, and nimble fingers. 30,000 Kati was able to greatly increase his power. In the eyes of other Shouja, especially Sword Shio, this might be a useless formation, but Zuemo liked it very much. Wasn't it just perfect to match with Vajra Profound Sutra? Thinking about having a pair of dark gold hands with the power of 1,000 Katis, unable to be destroyed, easily breaking down other people's flying sword, Zuemo's heart jumped in excitement. Of course, this was just a fantasy. No one would let their flying sword get caught by another person's hand. However, as a trap, this was still one that people could not defend against. Nimble Fingers was a formation that was widely used. Its attribute was to increase the nimbleness of fingers. However, this was not that useful for Zuemo. In low-level Shouja, his finger motions was already very strong. The increase it would give him was almost nothing. Nimble Fingers was more effective the less familiar a Shouja was with finger motions. Those that were familiar, there wasn't much of an effect. Okay, people shouldn't be too greedy. Zhuemo muttered inside. He needed to go to Dongfu right now, and sell a talisman to gather up the jingxue needed to clear his debts. The belt probably couldn't sell for much jingxue. If it really wasn't enough, he had to sell this pair of vambraces as well. He was slightly reluctant. Vambraces that had nimble fingers on it were easy to buy. What he was reluctant to sell was the 30,000 catty formation. But he was poor, Zhuemo had no way around it. The gray-beaked goose had flown away, so Zhuemo could only flip out his flying paper crane. Lil Yellow, it's time for you to perform. Sitting on the paper crane, Zhuemo swayed and staggered his way to Dongfu. The outer sect disciples of Wukong's sword sect, when they saw Zhuemo riding a paper crane, first paused, and then their faces were full of admiration as they bowed to Zhuemo. Did you hear? Xixiang went alone to challenge Ling Ying's sect. 1 against 5 and managed to beat all of them. All of Dongfu has heard it. On the paper crane, Zhuemo's body froze and he started to sweat. This rumor. Yes. Such a stunning incident, how could I not have? I heard that there was a 10 zhang tall spider, whose gigantic mouth could swallow a bull whole, so Xixiang used only one move to beat it until it begged for mercy. Sitting on the paper crane, Zhuemo almost dropped off. It was more like he had almost begged for mercy. So strong. Look at Xixiang, such a powerful person, and is riding a first-grade paper crane. What is called living frugally? What is inscrutable? This is... Yes. Zhuemo finally couldn't bear it any longer and fled. An extremely well-attired middle-aged person was repeatedly examining a soft gold belt, expression excited and heated. Good thing. Really a good thing. TSK, look, this weaving, 72 joyful crane technique, isn't something any master can knit out. Look at the style, the 2 words, extremely noble. Very classic form, won't go out of style for at least 50 years. Soft gold silk is a good material. Gold yet not blinding, bright but not crass. Only this kind of fine material can display it to the best advantage. If it's something lesser, it would be too cheap, and the comfort would be less. Someone who can buy something like this, who would buy it if it wasn't comfortable? See this lucky knot, skilled. Using lucky knots to lock the edge, I've never seen something like it. This time, I've really broadened my visions. This, martial bearing, formation has had great care in it. This position, it perfectly covers the entire body. Wearing it, if you don't look elegant and grand, it must be the base material is terrible. Zhuemo dazedly came out of the store, the 100 treasures pouch at his waist full and bulging. He felt like he was in a dream. A soft gold belt carved with a martial bearing formation was actually the most expensive of all these talismans. These days, was it him that was crazy, or them that was crazy? He couldn't understand. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.